All right. It's happening.
What is?
It's happening right now. We are
It's
live.
happening now?
Welcome everyone that is here with us. We hope there are people here with us. I don't know.
We're going live tonight?
It's on.
Oh, all right. All right. We'll do this.
You're the one that said go live.
I did.
I don't like live, but Joe likes live. It's fine.
That's
with
right.
me.
We'll do it live.
Yeah. And we want to make sure. I think it records it anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If nothing else, YouTube records it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I hope. Okay.
Right?
Mhm.
That's what it
I
is.
think so.
That's what they
Okay.
do.
That's what
Hello,
they do.
Google. Hello, our
Hello.
wise overlords, our wise masters. What's
We
my
don't
credit?
know you, but you probably know us.
Oh, do you know us?
I mean, yeah, not me as bad as Joe. No, just kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Probably me too. Let's
Listen,
see.
Google, you
It
and I,
says
we have
we're
a
live.
commitment.
Why does it not show us live on YouTube though? Do you see us?
I will look.
Yeah, I think we best make sure
Mhm.
because I
It is
scheduled it that
always
way.
good. It's supposed to give me a.
It literally says so. Oh, it says we have one viewer, so we must. Oh, yep,
Hello,
there
one viewer.
we're live. It says
Oh.
live viewers because I'm on there and it shows me.
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
So you're our one viewer, or there are more?
I think so. I think it's me.
Hot. That's how we do it.
As one does.
We
Yeah.
are so good at this. We got all sorts of internet technology. This is why the Mormon Church fears us, because we got the power of internet.
Fear us. They totally fear us. Oh, it's showing live because I'm on my other stream. So that's happening. So we're waiting. See the feedback? There it is. There's
there
a
it
slight
is.
delay.
We
There
are
is a
live.
slight delay.
Well, yeah, that'll happen. Because the signal is going around the world.
It is for one person. But really, it doesn't matter. It just matters that it
The
records
people
so we can
in
put
the
this
future.
out. I did
Before
put
the
this on
people.
TikTok. I put
Before
this
any
on
people get
everywhere.
in here, I just want to let you people know you people in the future are our favorites. That's why you should smash, annihilate, completely decapitate the like button and get comments down there that help Heidi.
Yes, please do. Please.
Please.
Hello.
Please forgive my
Jacob had
tardiness. I did my
No,
best.
you're okay.
I did my best. But you're still dealing with Mormon Standard Time. That's something I have yet to repent of.
Mormon Standard Time. That's right.
Dude, when you get
That's
Mormon
right.
Standard Time mixed with Latin Standard Time, you're lucky to start the same day.
Oh, I have a family like that. We called it our last name and then Standard Time. I thought that was good too. Yeah. So you
Hey, Jacob, IsBell, how are you?
Exmo Joe, I like it already.
Yeah. You like that?
I might win the beard contest. I'm not going to win that mustache contest. That's nice.
Oh, uh-oh.
That's nice.
Listen.
Shots
just feels
fired.
Like I'm trying to understand, but it looks like it's facing magnetic north naturally.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What's up? That's what's up.
In a
How's
moment,
Jacob
I'm going to be
tonight?
showing us pictures of AI generated pictures of William Law, and that's going to put us all to shame.
Yeah.
This is true. Not me.
What-
I don't need a beard. I don't want one.
Yeah, well, you wait till you see William Law's AI generated beard and then tell me.
Yeah. I'm not a beard woman. In general, I don't want one, nor do I really love them. I know they're the thing right now. I know.
Okay, you know what, Jacob? Let's get this person out of here. This is just
See, she couldn't even. She did meet me in person, and she didn't realize that mine is fake. It's what I used to hide from the feds.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
That's why it looks so good though. It's like the beards in The Life of Brian that they get that you can buy when you go to the stoning.
Yeah,
that's what's up.
High quality.
His beard didn't come off during the takedown, which was
nope. I had to use some extra good adhesive.
Yes. Also known as wig glue.
For those of our viewers in the future who don't know.
Oh, this is already live. I'm bantering. I thought we were I'm sorry. I'm going to
Come on,
shut my
Jacob.
filthy
Game
mouth
face.
and
No,
let
no.
get to work.
You
I'm
know
gonna let
what?
Game face, IsBell.
Jacob, really, they know because they watch me, and if they're tuning in to watch us, they know who I am and also Exmo Joe, and we banter a whole lot. It's half of our show, you know. There's my mom. Shout out, Cindy. Hello, Mom.
Oh, I can join the chat as me.
You can join the chat. Anybody can join. Jacob should be able to as well. So we are going to do this live, but we will obviously resubmit for those sad people that have other things to do on a Saturday night. Who the heck said they could? What?
Inappropriate. Indecent.
I know. This is so much fun. And Joe has been trying to get this rolling for a bit. He saw you on one of my shows and he's like, hey, the guy that sings with the beard. I'm like, yeah, he's my friend.
Dude, I've been out singing tonight. I literally met a dude at Main Street Guitars in Logan, Utah. I was like, hey, you want to do churchy stuff and play some music? And we did.
Whoa.
He had no clue what he was getting into. He didn't know anything about Mormonism, and I introduced him to the weird Mormons, and it went really well.
There are people in Logan who don't know anything about Mormonism.
He is moving by way of Louisiana, so I'll send you the video. We got bluegrass and chicken picking it up, and
wow,
it was something glorious.
I've been to Louisiana. If you get this person's number, tell him to turn his butt around, go home, because that's like, man, for the food alone. Go back to Louisiana.
I mean, who wants to live in Utah after living in Louisiana?
I'm a descendant of Cache Valley people, so yeah, I have to remind my wife.
Am I a descendant of the Davis County people? But I'm just saying, I love the mountains. The rest is overrated.
I have to razz my people, except when it comes to talking about cheese, and people think it's all funny. And when I tell them, I say, you know what Cache Valley cheese is from? Cache Valley, Utah. And they're like, oh, is that something to really be proud of? I say, no, it totally is.
Yes.
It
squeaks better at Cache Valley.
Sometimes I eat a block of Cache Valley cheese and drink a gallon of Weber County prune juice and just let them battle it out.
Oh, Lord. That sounds like a bad night. That sounds like a parasite cleanse.
One day,
intestinal jujitsu at its finest.
I went one day. My wife found me. She's like, the kids say that they bought a box of ice creams, sandwiches, and went down into the basement by yourself with them. And and I'm like sitting there with a brand new box of Fat Boys. Not. And I said, and she's like, a fat boy. I said, I am not. That hurts my feelings, but I am.
Yeah.
And I said, they're Cascos. And she's like, what the heck is a Casco? I said, it is the flavor of my childhood. That's
what's up. Did you say it's far superior? Come on now.
Basically, my grandmother had 10 children in the old-fashioned Mormon family way. One wife. 10 children, one wife.
No bring them up in the house.
Rollinses, Cache Valley Rollinses are hardcore, man.
Dude, Emma had 9 of them. Michelle Brady Stone, 13. I only got 3.
Yeah, I got 3.
Working. You still believe in some principles, although not bring them.
I know. I got to keep sneaking them past the goalie. So at a certain point, I might need to just cut out and say, hey, time to go multiply and replenish.
I mean, come on, girlfriend. Don't end up like Emma. Just kidding. So for those of us out there that do not know who all my friends are, I want to do a quick little intro because they may not know what a pneumo is. Hopefully they know what an Exmo is if they watch me a lot.
Yeah,
that's the point. So I'll do a quick little intro here and have you guys explain, because honestly, Jacob, until I met you, I don't know that I knew what a pneumo was. So
it didn't even have that name when you first met me.
I think that was Paranoid American and Exertus. I think Exertus and Paranoid American were very into renaming that. We also got Mace Mo now for Masons. Mace Mo. And
get out.
So
get out. All of you get out. This is Exmo territory. You all just go do your own thing.
Now, if I have been excommunicated by default, does that make me Exmo?
No.
I mean, you're
sort
of what Joe says about this. I'm going let Joe enlighten you on.
I am the self-appointed king of the Exmos. And well, now what it is that I do a lot of content on my channel about Tim Ballard. And after he was excommunicated, I started the hashtag failed Mormons are not Exmos because we don't want anything to do with that guy. He's not one of us. So.
Those of us that left before, but technically, I mean, you did it knowing and you were already kind of going, you didn't become an Exmo just because, like, you did stand up for your beliefs and say that's enough of this before you were X'd. So
yeah, I said out loud that Joseph Smith was not the philandering teenage marrying sexual predator that the church teaches him to be, and apparently that's a no-no. People must verbally acknowledge that Joseph Smith was secretly marrying and stooping teenage girls as well as married women. It's a no-no.
That's so funny because I said the exact opposite. This is not a line. That's true. I did the exact opposite at my court of love and got that letter on the wall for my trouble.
Oh man. I am technically still a member of the church. I need
what?
I've invited her to go to my ward with me and she declined.
But Jacob says I get kicked out if I go with him.
No. You'll be fine with me. They like. Do you want me to do a little intro so people understand who the heck I am?
Yes.
So my name's Jacob IsBell, lifelong member of the church. I've been Jesus dude missionary since I was a teenager, always in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, abnormally prepared young missionary. And when I was the Elders Quorum president in 2019, somebody says, why do you think Joseph Smith was a polygamist? It sent me down a trajectory to figure that one out. And I'm not going to give the long story. I'm not even going to give the short story. I'm going to say I learned for myself that Joseph Smith never taught, never practiced, and polygamy in any form. And that Doctrine and Covenants section 132 is fraudulently attributed to Joseph Smith. So the short version of like, well, how do you navigate your Mormondom? The Book of Mormon warns about the secret combinations that assassinated Joseph Smith, took over the church, and the big Utah corporation is not the institution that Joseph Smith started. So that's the short version. I'm still on fire for Jesus. I believe that the Book of Mormon is an actual record of a branch of the House of Israel that lived on this continent. And sometimes I like to wrestle people.
Okay. And he doesn't believe in anything past Joseph, so he doesn't believe in the Brigham stuff, right?
Yeah,
is that right?
Brigham Young literally in the Book of Mormon. Well, let me ask this: it's in your mustache. Why put your name up there so I can call you the real name? Exmo Joe. Were you a missionary at one point? Okay, there you go. I'm just making sure that I have a certain amount of background. King Noah is definitely a pattern for Brigham Young, to where many wives and concubines, became himself a wine bibber, taxed the people very heavily, lived in lavish building, refused to work himself, had to move 1,000+ miles away from where he used to live, where they laid the smackdown regarding one wife and one wife only. Yeah, he is the prototype for Brigham Young is following that exact pattern of King Noah from the Book of Mormon.
Ouch.
Interesting.
We're going to get into this. And Exmo Joe, let him know what all about you for those of them that are new.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, I'm Exmo Joe. I'm the complaints department of the Hellfire Agency podcast, and make the complaints aggressive, please. And
devilishly handsome. It's so distracting.
That's right. Well, it happens. This is why I don't do a lot of interviews. But I left the church shortly after my mission when I realized there was no God, which was a problem. That was 24 years ago, and I have been an ex-Mormon since. My real name is Joe Rollins. I am the author of the book, The Korihor Argument, A Missionary's Journey Out of Mormonism, which was a ex-Mormon book bestseller, flew off the shelves in dozens of copies. And I'm currently recording the audiobook version on my website, which is hellfire.agency, where the podcast is, because that's how most people want to consume these books these days. So, I'm Joe. I'm an ex-Mormon. I'm an atheist. And I cover right-wing religious scandals of the American right on Hellfire Agency. You guys will love it.
And he also does a show with me, Heidi Luv, and I'm going to be the separator, not as much, well, maybe the jokester a little bit. I don't know. But I'm here for the popcorn tonight. I'm at the Unfiltered Rise Podcast. I set these two guys up together per request of Joe. Jacob, very nice to have you as well. We decided this would be a fun time. And I am also an Exmo of the other sort. I still do believe in Jesus and the Bible and that King David was real, even though Joe thinks I'm crazy. And and sometimes we joke about, you know, Joe's affiliation with the Dark Lord, but actually he doesn't believe in him. So I ruin all his fun jokes by saying he doesn't believe in anybody.
Right at the head of the show, man. Come on, man.
For your mom. For your mom.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
I'm trying to explain to her that he's not a Satanist. Nor can he be.
Now, however, I do want to remind everyone that if you do go to hellfire.agency, you can sign up today for only $6.66 a month.
There you go. And there you go, folks. So today, what are we covering, Joe? We'll start with.
So you guys heard Jacob's polite word story about Joseph Smith not really being a polygamist. I've listened to Jacob's debates, and I feel like there is a pretty major flaw. We're here to discuss it as cordially as we can, but still make it fun and entertaining, and call each other out. We were going to do it tomorrow, so I thought I had an extra day to prepare the slides and the conversation. So I'm hoping I am sufficiently prepared, but we're going to do the best. So I'm going to lead the conversation is what we had arranged. And I'll be doing that with some slides. I just discovered I could upload here onto StreamYard, and there they are. So here in a minute, we'll launch into that. And Jacob and I are going to just have a conversation around the resolution. Let's see. The Nauvoo Expositor is good contemporary proof of Joseph Smith's polygamy. Hey, there it is. Cool.
There it is.
And there it is. So at any point in time, Jacob and I will just, we'll just have an agreement that, hey, interrupt politely, and then let's have a little bit of leniency if Joe doesn't have all of his sources pulled up and ready. let's have an opt-out button for I have that somewhere. Let me get it to you. Okay. All right.
That's totally fine because, we decided to do this live and early. That's fine.
I got a question to throw in.
Yeah.
Polygamy, Joseph Smith's polygamy right now, the Mormon scholastic historic community, they can't even define what it is that Joseph Smith practices. For example, Brian Stutzman recently did a podcast where he says Joseph was doing some sort of dynastic sealing. It wasn't actually marriages. Other people are saying that it was just some sort of sealing in the next life. In other words, they're describing a kind of polygamy that has absolutely no similarity to what was obviously practiced by Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young. When you say Joseph Smith's polygamy, can you describe the polygamy that Joseph Smith is to have practiced?
Well, the claim made in the Nauvoo Expositor is that he used polygyny, specifically one man having multiple wives, as an excuse to have intercourse and or relationships in life with women in the Mormon community.
So in other words, like the carnal sense of having additional wives.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And maybe the biblical sense.
You definitely go a lot further than the LDS historians, but and here's what I totally respect. Jacob Hansen,
that's always true.
And others, they will not say that. They literally have to make up some kind of fake non-polygamy that they're really scared to define. So I appreciate your clarity in saying Joseph Smith physically had wives in the carnal sense that we would understand additional wives.
Yeah, I mean that's the claims anyway in the Expositor. Now, if we were to go on and talk about polyandry, if we were to talk about adoption, spiritual adoption, all of the frankly scary things that get involved in that, racially motivated things that get involved with that, that would be a much longer conversation. But yes, but as far as Joseph Smith practicing in life, we're talking about something. A revelation similar to 132, what is currently Doctrine and Covenants 132, I am prone to believe it was probably exactly D&C 132. But I understand Jacob's, argument that that may have actually been doctored, altered, or completely fabricated by Brigham Young and or the Utah Saints later. Here, what we're here to talk about is this. One of Jacob's, correct me if I'm wrong, one of your main claims has been that all the claims about Joseph Smith's practicing polygamy in his life when he was here on earth, were made by people after the fact, in most cases years after the fact, and so are not trustworthy. The one thing that sticks out every time is the Nauvoo Expositor, which of course was printed in the last days of Joseph Smith's life, and really played a key part of Joseph Smith's death, really. And so that's where whenever I hear you talking with Jacob at the Thoughtful Faith, Jacob Hansen, whenever you Jacob, you guys are talking about the Nauvoo Expositor, and I heard you say on more than one case, why are we taking the word of the Nauvoo Expositor and the people of the Nauvoo Expositor? And I was like, because they know, and because they were there, and because it was a contemporary account of pretty much exactly what, at least some document similar to D&C 132 existing in the last days of Joseph Smith's life, and was used, at least in the case of Jane Law, according to Jane Law, was being used to try and convert women to become his wives, Joseph Smith's personal wives. So that's where we start. Okay, so go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and one of the reasons why somebody like Jacob Hansen and others who are LDS proper, they would be held accountable differently, because in one hand they're saying Joseph Smith was a man of God and God's mouthpiece, while literally promoting the words of the traitors that got him killed. So it makes much more sense, and it seems much more consistent that you would refer to those in the Nauvoo Expositor as opposed to those who are hailing Joseph Smith as a prophet of God.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I will say, if the traitors are the ex-Mormons, I think we prefer apostates or dissidents, but that's fine too. So this is not loading as I thought it would, but that's fine. We'll go with it. No, it's fine. So let's start the story here. And again, you can interrupt me, and we can also talk, afterwards if we get through. Yes.
I think I do have control, so let me know when you want to go to next slide.
Oh, I have control. I could go to slide.
Oh, you have control? Okay, yep. You're good.
No problem. So how do you solve a problem like John C. Bennett? John C. Bennett, for those who don't know, was a deadbeat. He was a con man. He was a womanizer. And when he had time on the side, he was also a doctor, and he was a Mormon, and he was very close to Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith loved the guy. His close association with Joseph Smith led to his becoming one of the founders of the city of Nauvoo. He helped to write the charter for the city of Nauvoo. He was elected the first mayor of Nauvoo. He was the chancellor of the University of Nauvoo. He was the mason of he was a mason in the Nauvoo Lodge, I believe. I was supposed to check that, but I believe that's true. Yes. As a matter of fact, I did double check it. He was kicked out, but while he was still in the church, he was still part of the Nauvoo Lodge. And he is Major General in the Nauvoo Legion, which at the time was the largest standing military unit in the United States at that time. And he was also the president of the church. Oh, I'm sorry. He was assistant to the president of the church. Sorry, I always get that mixed up. In June 1842, he wrote some letters to the Sangamo Journal and to other publications in which he accused Joseph Smith of secretly practicing and promoting polygamy under the guise of spiritual wifery. And he also exposed the proposal to Sidney Rigdon and the infamous Happiness Letter, in which Joseph Smith was said to have tried to persuade her and the spiritual benefits of polygamy, very carefully worded. She was at that time 18 years old. She was not his youngest bride, if in fact she was supposed to become his bride, which she did not in the end. That he abuses, that Joseph Smith was abusing his power within the church and in the city of Nauvoo, and that he was abusing the Nauvoo Legion, using it basically to bully their neighbors with the threat of violence. Again, they were the largest standing militia in the United States at the time. They were intimidating. So on August 1st, 1842, yep. Did you have a question or a statement, Jacob?
Uh-oh, it's freezing.
You no
said question. No. I might. I'm totally good, but I might just have to refresh my browser. Sometimes it gets glitchy like this.
Okay.
Oh, that's no fun. Okay, well we'll watch for you.
We'll be here.
Okay. So
we can wait just a minute. We can banter again.
Oh my gosh, that's dangerous.
Oh, I mean, we could talk more about how I need to get thrown out of the church.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I should just be good. And I figured they'd throw me out by now. And then I wouldn't have to go to all this trouble of asking to get out because it's a big whole ordeal. I think maybe I don't want to go to what did you call it? The meeting of love?
The court of love.
The court of love.
Court of love.
Correct. I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know. But maybe
see,
if I did it, I could record it. That would be pretty funny.
I know. I sure did, and I loved it. But yeah, it was. But that's for me. That's my experience, But most people in the church, most people who leave the church today, hello, friends. I see your comments. Everybody should comment.
Hello.
But most people who do leave, actually resign from the church, you can use quitmormon.org is still active. The church has made it a little more difficult, which is telling. But for a while, it was pretty simple. You'd go to quitmormon.org, you would fill out the form, and then an attorney here in Salt Lake would take a list of all the people who removed their name from the records of the church, take it over to church headquarters, and mass damnation for us all. Hey, Jacob, welcome back.
Okay. We were bantering again. We waited for you. Banter it was. We talked about the court of love that Heidi hasn't gone to. Heidi's discussing whether I should do that or not, or just jump off the boat and, all that.
Hello, our friends in the comments. Yorkshire.
Yes.
Welcome. Thanks for coming and joining us live. And to you people in the future who are our favorites, don't tell the people who are alive that you're our favorites, that we have favorites. Anyways, so yeah, shall we continue?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. Jacob's
in. Leslie Ann.
So on August 1st, 1842, in the Times and Seasons printed an article about the church's position on marriage, etc., that I'm sure Jacob would love. I'm sure he has read. To accompany that, they also printed an affidavits and certificates that was in response to Bennett's claims in the Sangamo Journal. That was included with it. And that's this document over here. Well, this is the best copy of it that I could find anyway. But if you look very carefully here, there's a section where the city of Nauvoo council, the city council, signed an affidavit. Now, just so we're clear, there are lots of claims that are made by people in all this story. But an affidavit means that the person has sworn basically before a notary, an officer of the court, like a justice of the peace. Sometimes in some states, it can be an attorney who is authorized to record that it was witnessed that you said said thing. And it's kind of a throwing down the gauntlet. It's a legal gauntlet throw. Do people lie in affidavits in this time period? Yes. Do they do it today? Yes. But technically you can be charged with perjury if you do, and if somebody can prove it. So you don't want to lie in an affidavit. So in this affidavit, for example, the city of Nauvoo, the city council swore an affidavit that they didn't know anything about any Danites, which is wild because there are Danites in here, and that they didn't know anything about Joseph Smith preaching polygamy or anybody practicing polygamy under the doctrine of Mormonism, which is remarkable because of the people in this document. In these signatures, you have John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, you have Heber C. Kimball, who is the father of one of Joseph Smith's wives. Sorry, but he was. And then you have, you have George Albert Smith. You have Newell K. Whitney. Hey, Grandpa Whitney. And you have Brigham Young. I mean, so needless to say, you got polygamists in here swearing in an affidavit. So this is, I'm just calling it out what it is. I'm going to make a lot of talk, a lot of hullabaloo about affidavits are a big deal. But yes, people lie about it because you have Danites in here swearing that they don't know anything about Danites, and polygamists who's swearing they don't know anything about polygamists, including the man they swore in front of, the Justice of the Peace, was Daniel H. Wells, who later becomes the mayor of Salt Lake City, Utah, and the head of the Nauvoo Legion during the time period of like the Mountain Meadows Massacre and when the Danites are out doing Danite business. He is the guy who's recording them on behalf of the state. So, yes.
I like the Danites. Just kidding.
We go back into that. But okay, so that's in there. But I wanted to point out there is one name here that becomes very important in our story. You'll see at the top here, the sign here says Wilson Law. Wilson Law is the brother of this man, W.M. Law, or William Law, who we're going to talk about at length here. These are both men who will later become publishers of the Nauvoo Expositor. Also in here, you'll see the testimony of one Elias Higbee. He was a more senior gentleman and a member of the church. And he has two sons, Chauncey Higbee, who's this man over here, and Francis Higbee, who's this man over here. Both of them are critics of the church by the time later that the Expositor is published, but they are also among the editors / publishers of the Nauvoo Expositor. So I just want to drive this home here. Okay, all of this document is being compiled at the behest of Joseph Smith and the city council and the church, stating that we are countering John C. Bennett's claims that we are using this doctrine of polygamy to justify Joseph Smith's womanizing and, by extension, John C. Bennett's womanizing. So for that purpose, they have these people swear an affidavit that it's not true, and then they published it.
So, Jacob, anything on that before we go to the next one? Do you have anything about that
just a little bit.
last one?
In other words, just to make sure that I understand the narrative being laid out from the Nauvoo Expositor, all of the names that we see on that slide are people who says there was no polygamy happening of any kind. Yet we know that John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, Heber C. Kimball, among others, clearly were shown to be polygamists at least after the death of Joseph Smith. And
at that time, I mean, we have the multiple accounts of their marriages at this time.
Yeah. And what would you say would be the strongest evidence from there that Joseph Smith was engaged in the practice of Heber C. Kimball, Brigham Young, and others?
Of their practice of it?
Yeah. In other words, I'm not disputing one bit that Heber C. Kimball, Brigham Young were secretly polygamous at this time in Nauvoo. How does that implicate Joseph Smith?
Well, so the closest implication I would say is the Nauvoo Expositor. The fact that William Law is going to expose that he, from firsthand account, knows Joseph Smith to be doing exactly what John C. Bennett claimed he was doing, even though many of the claims of John C. Bennett we know factually to be wrong, or suspect strongly to be factually wrong. John C. Bennett made things up all the time. And he gave contradictory accounts. There are lots of things. To say that I could cite you a specific example, I would have to go to journal entries about the marriages of individuals. I'd have to get you exactness.
Your claim is that in the Nauvoo Expositor, William Law claims Joseph Smith is secretly practicing polygamy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. and teaching it to others like him. That he's sharing a revelation like the one that is claimed in as DNC 132 now. Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right. So let's talk about this guy a little bit. Who he is. This is William Law, best beard in Nauvoo, running 4 years in a row, obviously, as you can tell. 1837, he was an Irish-Canadian immigrant who converted to Mormonism in Churchville, Canada. That's just north of America, where he soon became branch president. In 1839, he led the Canadian saints in his congregation there to gather to Nauvoo, where he started a mill and a store that were both very successful. In 1841, he was called as a second counselor in the first presidency. That's what gets us to this point in history. So fair to say, this man, while he will become quite maligned by Joseph Smith and others, he was about as much a Latter-day Saint as you could hope for. This man who, he was a convert to the church, and he sacrificed a lot for building up Zion. So, of course, it's shocking when on June 7th, 1844, he and his fellow publishers, particularly the Higbee brothers that we just talked about, his own brother that we were just talking about, and a handful of others that we can go into, published a document called the Nauvoo Expositor. They built their own press, and they opened their own printing office and planned to continue printing stories just like the ones in this first edition, on a regular basis, and sell ads in it, get people to subscribe to it, everything. The whole idea here was that the Nauvoo Expositor would expose all of the corruption happening in Nauvoo at the time, which was extensive, I would say. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. We just disagree. Jacob and I will disagree that it was Joseph Smith. Part of the main part of the Nauvoo Expositor are 3 affidavits. Again, 3 affidavits means that they are documents that are sworn before an officer of the court who is authorized to receive and testify to affidavits, and witnessed, meaning that they are legal documents. They are by William Law, who accuses Joseph Smith of secretly teaching a polygamy revelation. I have the expositor pulled up if we want to get into the word by word of that, but I'd say we do that after we get through the whole story here. And then Jane Law, who says that Joseph and Hiram taught her husband the revelation and that Joseph Smith had proposed to her to become one of his wives, even though she was, to get ahead of yourselves, even though she was obviously already married to William. And then Austin Cowles, who's a high-ranking member of the Nauvoo community and the church at that time, who also testified that Smith had secretly taught and practiced polygamy in Nauvoo. And then it also included the statement by the person who actually took the affidavits.
Let me just go back to the last one real quick.
Yeah.
For something like this, we see it quite clearly on there. How is somebody supposed to find the original source where we can read Jane Law saying for herself that Joseph proposed to her?
Well, I mean, in this slide or in life?
Yeah. In other words, you put it on a slide. How can somebody verify Jane Law herself claiming Joseph proposed to her?
I mean, I can pull up the actual affidavit.
It seems like that would be the honest thing to do. Jane Law claims Joseph Smith proposed to her. Where can we read Jane Law saying that for herself?
I'll have to look at the actual. We can look into the actual claim.
I think you're making it up.
Okay. I mean, I'm not above that, but I'll have to read. I'll admit that it's been a moment since I read the actual.
Let me take you back because that implies intention. I don't mean to do that. I don't mean to come off that aggressively. In other words, I've heard people make this claim about Jane Law. Joseph Smith proposed to me. And when they're just asked where, they ain't got nothing. So in other words, I know I probably have done it before as well, where I'll repeat things that I have found to be credible. Unless you show Jane Law saying it for herself, it seems like it could be an egregious error for it to show up on this slide.
Okay. So I know I've seen that someplace. I might have to get that to you.
I know Mormon Stories has repeated that for a whole bunch of years, and I think it's a load of hogwash. I've never found anybody to show that, because keep in mind, it's the positive claim that you're making. I am positing that Joseph Smith did this, so the burden of proof would be on you to show it. It's not my burden to prove a negative.
Okay, so this is the actual statements made in the expositor. As far as other claims about what had been said by Jane Law or possibly by hearsay sources, and that may be the case, that most of what we know about
is there something you can put in the chat so people can read, so I can read Jane Law's affidavit for myself, where she claims Joseph Smith proposed to me and wanted me as an additional wife?
So what I'm looking,
claiming that you've read
this is the actual
you've read that from Jane Law herself. You've read that?
I can tell you, I know that that's the claim made about her, and here's the claim that's actually stated.
In other words, because even right now, you're repeating stuff that you haven't verified for yourself.
Well, okay. Now, I did have an extra day supposedly to produce all of my sources.
I'm agreeable with that. But just keep in mind, you're making a huge
Let me read the
claim. Joseph Smith proposed to Jane Law according to Jane Law, and you can't even show us Jane making that accusation. I don't think the accusation you just put on your slide exists.
Can we agree that there are first-hand accounts and there are second-hand accounts and third-hand accounts that exist, and that those exist
there's also such things as repeating things that don't exist in reality, and I think it might fall into that category.
Okay, so you're saying that I'm making a claim.
Hold on. Let me just say this, because I'm Googling. So Brigham Young's account states that Jane Law stated that Smith had, quote, asked her to give him half her love. She was at liberty to keep the other half for her husband. She refused Smith's request to marry him as a polyamorous plural wife. This is Brigham Young.
Can you think of why people might have an issue with Brigham Young's claims? It's not Jane Law speaking for herself. In other words,
so secondhand.
You're making an amazing claim. Jane Law accuses Joseph Smith of proposing to her, and you can't even show where somebody can read it for themselves.
Okay, but wait a second. That is something that people can read for themselves. And the question here becomes, if I can finish real quickly,
Jane Law saying this for herself.
Jacob, I understand.
Like I know the narrative that people have been repeating for just generations, but if you haven't studied the original sources, you're asking people to believe in a narrative that you're verifying in real time. You have no clue.
Okay. Here's the actual quote. Joe? I'm going to go ahead and put it in the comments here. Hopefully that posts. It posted it twice. Okay, so this is the actual, and you can Google it, or I can pull it up on the screen if you want me to.
Yeah, pull it up. You can pull it up.
You want to pull it up on the screen? I'm looking in the comments. Oh, I gotta hit something. It says for me to join. Oh, there we go.
Can I read it? How about this? How about if I read it and then we'll go, and then afterwards, because we got the slides pulled up, and then afterwards I will gladly show you the actual document. We can find it in there.
Okay.
How's that sound? Okay, so this is the actual claim. This is the actual quote by Jane Law. I certify that I read the revelation referred to in the above affidavit of my husband, that's William Law. It sustained in strong terms the doctrine of more wives than one at a time in this world and in the next. It authorized some to have to the number of 10 and set forth that those women who would not allow their husbands to have more wives than one should be under condemnation before God, signed Jane Law. So
I like that. Now what we read there, is it fair to say that you didn't read Jane Law accusing Joseph Smith of proposing to her?
You don't read that in the Nauvoo Expositor that I know of.
Okay.
And I had put it in there. So that there I had apparently conflated that with other stories like the Brigham Young account. But let's be clear.
Because I can point out some details where you and I would at least be in agreement. What is today known as Doctrine and Covenants, Section 132, was not published until September 14th, 1852 in the Deseret News, more than 8 years after Joseph Smith's death, well over 8 years after the Nauvoo Expositor. There is no original. So whatever, because I'm not impugning Jane for her statement there, But we do not possess the ability, if Jane did read something saying wives in this life and in the next, she doesn't say that Joseph Smith, she doesn't have an original. Nobody else can do an original. The copy that was produced by Brigham Young, September 14th, 1852, 8 years after the fact, is nothing more than a copy. There's 8 years from what you just read right there, and from anybody saying, oh, this must have been what she read 8 years ago. We simply can't verify what it is that she read and who it was from, whose handwriting it is in, and if it has anything to do with Joseph Smith.
Okay, so wait a second. Are you okay? All right. Let's go.
She may have read something. In other words, because the list that you had just a couple of slides ago, where it has Wilford Woodruff, it has Heber C. Kimball, it has Brigham Young, and it has others who are practitioners of polygamy. Among the possibilities is they're circulating something and trying to attribute it to Joseph Smith. Perhaps Jane did read something, and I would love it if we could show that it came from Joseph Smith or not.
Okay, but let's at least draw the correlations that make it fairly easy and a pretty big assumption to say, okay, well, there's no association between the documents of what's now Doctrine and Covenants 132 and the document that Jane Law is referring to here.
I know there's the Joseph and Hiram both. Yeah, Joseph and Hiram both referred to this accusation saying there was no revelation about polygamy, about more than one wife in this life or beyond. It dealt with times past, referring to the kind of levirate marriage that's dealt with in the Old Testament. So and they could be lying. I think it's reasonable for people, especially those who have a poor opinion of Joseph and Hiram Smith, to say they weren't being honest about it, but they're directly refuting her claim. And if she says, I've read a revelation, she never produced any revelation that we could verify. What claims to be that she's reading there, Brigham Young pulled out of his desk 8 years later in September of 1852 and says, oh, this must be it. It sounds, and I'll just say this regarding Doctrine and Covenants section 1, what's now 132. If you simply read it out loud, it sounds nothing like Joseph Smith has ever published in his life. And keep in mind, there's over 100 published revelations in the Latter-day Saint scriptures. And section 132 sounds nothing like it at all. You just do a word comparison, and you're gonna find sentences that are directly out of Heber C. Kimball's publications, Brigham Young's publications, and no relationship to any of the 100+ known published revelations from Joseph Smith. So again, whatever Jane Law read, I wish she could show something that would actually attribute it to Joseph Smith or someone else.
Okay, but let me ask you this. Okay, so are you sustaining here at all that Jane Law actually perjured herself and lied in this statement published in the Nauvoo Expositor?
I don't think so. I don't think, and I'm just offering my opinion, I don't think she would certify something that's flat out lie. Now, we make mistakes all the time, and I know that myself and others are susceptible to it. She could have been shown a revelation, because the men on that list that were practicing polygamy, Heber C. Kimball, Brigham Young, Wilford Woodruff, and others, may have been circulating something and attributing it to Joseph Smith. So it'd be nice if, hey, well, if somebody had a copy. But again, what she's saying 8 years later, we're saying it must have been this, when there's darn near a decade of separation, zero original, and it sounds nothing like Joseph Smith has ever produced.
But it sounds like we agree on this point, that if it says that the revelation, that she did read a revelation, and that it was the one referred to by her husband in the previous affidavit, then that's that she meant that, and she said.
And some of the only conflict that I can think of, like William Law is setting himself up as the president and prophet of the new church that he wants to start, and maybe she wants to. So that's some of the only conflict of interest that would be worthy of note. She literally wants to be the first lady to a new president, taking over all of the converts that were underneath President Joseph Smith. So,
but are we suggesting that she would perjure herself to do that?
Well, think about women in general. Right now, we see Jill Biden and the way that she treats
not
her
all
husband.
women. Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
We have one.
We see that it's very obvious.
Tread careful.
We're seeing in real time. We are seeing in real time that Jill Biden wants to hold on to power because of her husband's position. It seems reasonable that somebody like Jane Law would want that power position that her husband is pursuing for herself. So at least add it into the equation.
Okay, so you're not stating, if I can just steelman your argument, you're not stating outright that she is lying, but that you do see how she might have been lying to suit her own interests. Okay,
correct. Correct. In other words, whatever revelation she is referring to, there's no way for us to verify that it has anything to do with Joseph Smith. The revelation produced by Brigham Young 8+ years later sounds nothing like Joseph Smith has ever published.
Okay, but you do agree that this document was published in 1844.
Yeah. If this is the Nauvoo Expositor, boom, it's there, and it's been around for a long time. No dispute if we can show that that's from the Nauvoo Expositor.
Okay, I can pull that.
But in other words, the slide, the part of your slide that you still have up where Jane Law says Joseph Smith proposed to me, we haven't seen anything to verify that's reality.
Okay, and we'll get more into that. But here's,
it sounds like that's not a part. It sounds like you're not able to verify whether that's a part of the Nauvoo Expositor. Are you saying in the Nauvoo Expositor, Jane Law accuses Joseph Smith of proposing to her?
I see now in the actual text of it that it's a little more nuanced than that. Okay, so I'll go that far. In other words,
does she allude to it? You're saying it's nuanced. What's the closest thing?
Well, let me go there. Let me go there.
Nuanced. What's the closest thing to Jane Law saying Joseph Smith proposed to me? Give me the closest you got.
It's definitely William Law's affidavit would be the next nearest thing. So let me just get there for you, okay? But first, we went over a lot of things there. I want to just counter that claim. So in the quote that I just read to you from Jane Law's affidavit, she says, "In this world and in the next, it authorized some to have to the number of 10 wives, and set forth that those women who would not allow their husbands to have more wives than one should be under condemnation of God." If we read Doctrine and Covenants 132, verses 62 and 63, we see this rhetoric that has been connected again and again. And I don't want to get sidetracked. I just want to make sure that you have to be able to allow at least some correlations here and say caused or not. Is there causation or not? It's a question. Is the question about... Okay, is the question about the claim about 10 women. So in 62...
Like in other words, if there's if Doctrine and Covenant section 132 is a forgery, I would definitely expect some very similar language. Think about the way that Mark Hoffman duped Dallin H. Oaks among other top leaders of the church. The way that he duped them with fake documents claiming to be from the days of Joseph Smith is using language, using things that he knew, they're going to know that this is at least based in reality when he fabricates the other parts of it. So in other words, it sounds like a pretty tried and true method.
Okay, but I just want to state then what the accusation here is that Brigham Young, who gave multiple revelations in the name of the Lord, using his own hand and his own name and his own voice, and multiple times, had, in a Mark Hoffman way, decided he was going to quote a publication by ex-Mormons, including William Law and his wife Jane Law, and cite that in Doctrine and Covenants 132 in order to legitimize something that was, as far as anybody could claim, a revelation he could have signed in his own name. He could have stated plainly, Joseph gave this to me, and didn't say anything about it. But we're making the claim here that if there are similarities between Jane's account and Doctrine and Covenants 132, that it must be forgery.
Well, we don't know what she saw because there is no original. In other words, I would totally love it if we can nail it down more. But she makes a claim, and Brigham Young doesn't claim any original. Jane Law doesn't have access to any original. All we know is 8 years later, Brigham Young is using language that was referred to by Jane. Among the things I find to be very possible is a false revelation going around, which later became some of what's now Section 132.
Okay, so we can agree then.
In other words, there could be forgeries, but it's just like, dude, show that it's from Joseph Smith. We have 100 plus published revelations from Joseph Smith. We have volumes of public discourse, and the current Section 132 sounds nothing like Joseph Smith has ever produced. So in other words, that's why it just seems like grasping at straws when the positive claim is made. He was married to between 30 and 40 women. So now let me allude to this text kind of relates to this 8 years later. It's like, dude, you've got 30 plus women. Can't you just show that he was smooching with one of them or leaving them a love letter before he dies?
Sure. When and there's multiple claims. We can talk about that, but right now we're talking about the expositor. So I just want to associate here. So what I'm saying is that Jane Law's
once again on your claim, your slide
Jacob,
right now.
Jane,
I know, but let me just repeat this. Your slide that you have up, Jane Law says Joseph Smith proposed to me, doesn't exist. Now you're just going to nitpicking little things, saying it must be the document that Brigham Young produced 8 years later. You got slides up with things that that you've never even read for yourself.
Okay, so wait a second. I plainly admitted that when I encapsulated this slide, perhaps I misstated in the way I wrote that sentence.
Yeah,
but
do you stand by your claim that you have on the screen right now? Jane Law claims Joseph Smith proposed to her. Does it exist in reality or not?
And in the Nauvoo Expositor,
right?
no.
Yeah, does it exist in the Nauvoo Expositor? Does Jane Law accuse Joseph Smith of proposing to her in the Nauvoo Expositor?
That I know of, no.
Yeah, dude, why are we even doing this? This is a waste of my time. Dude,
That's
go do your
not,
homework. Dude, go do your homework. And let's go back and do this.
If you would stop interrupting me, Jacob.
I know, but dude, this is an absolute waste of my time. You didn't do your homework. You're making false accusations, and in real time, you're
if
having
you'll let
to
me finish
acknowledge
what I'm saying,
what you have published on your screen. You're forced to acknowledge you've never studied this. What a
That's not true. That's not true at all.
Waste of my time. What a waste of my time.
Now, Jacob, let's be sincere here. Okay, we agreed to be sincere and honest here.
If you're asking me to comfort you, you have lies on your screen right now, and you want me to be nice about it.
If I want you to just hear me. You can be as mean as you want here in a minute. Just hear what I'm saying first. Okay, so. We agree this much. You did agree here, okay, that there's at least it's plausible that Jane Law did, as she stated, read a revelation. That revelation is indeed, as we have said here, that she mentions parts of.
You and I agree that what Brigham Young produced in 1852 is similar to the language that you just showed from Jane Law.
I'm sorry?
You and I agree that the language Jane Law used in the Nauvoo Expositor sounds similar to what Brigham Young produced and published in the Deseret News, September 14th, 1852. That's what we agree on.
Okay, that there are similarities there, and that we don't know her to have any motive to lie. There may be plausibly.
I disagree with that. She's definitely trying to promote her husband, who wants to get all of the converts that he can away from Joseph Smith.
Okay, so we are saying then, I just want to get you back.
Jane Law wants to be the first lady to the new president of the new church.
Right, the true Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
In other words, that's the purpose of the Nauvoo Expositor. Yeah. William Law is now putting out his plea to get as many converts as possible. So no, Jane Law, we have to add into the equation. She's got a motive that must be taken into account, other than I'm just trying to say the truth.
Okay,
I'm into it.
Joe's taking that into account, and we both agree on the fact that there might be a reason. So what else were you going to say, Joe?
Okay, so what I'm saying here, before we move on to this part about William Law's affidavit, is that she did say that she had read the exact revelation that William Law had attested to in his affidavit there in the Expositor. And we agree that according to the claim that she's legally making here, it is the same document. Okay, that anybody reading the Expositor can read. This is the document as described in William Law's affidavit. I hereby certify that Hiram Smith did in his office read to me a certain written document, which he said was a revelation from God. He said that he was with Joseph when it was received. He afterwards gave me the document to read, and I took it to my house and read it and showed it to my wife and returned it next day. The revelation, so-called, authorized certain men to have more wives than one at a time in this world and in the world to come. It said this was the law and commanded Joseph to enter into the law, and also that he should administer to others. Several other items were in the revelation supporting the above doctrines. So we can at least agree there is a document according to the claims of the laws. That Jane Law says that it's the same document she read is the one that William Law says he received from Hiram, that Hiram had told him that Joseph had received the revelation in his presence, and that it was a law authorizing not only the practice of polygamy, but requiring Joseph to teach polygamy to others and get them to enter into polygamy. Now, I'm not saying that we have definite proof positive that those things happened. All I'm saying is here in the Nauvoo Expositor, William and Jane Law are on record as having sworn in by court of law that they are true, that much is true.
Yeah,
then Austin
they're claiming that they've read a document that makes that claim. Mm-hmm.
That makes the claim about polygamy.
And it sounds like William Law is saying this was shown to me by Hiram.
And who told him that it was received in his presence by Joseph Smith. We agree that that's the claim he's making.
Yeah. So in other words,
whether or not it's true,
he's publishing third-hand accounts.
Yeah. He's not even publishing the document. But what we know of the document is that it makes reference to polygamy, to God teaching the doctrine of polygamy, to Joseph Smith and requiring Joseph Smith to practice it, teach it to others, and that he gave it to William Law to show to Jane Law. She did see it. That much. We're getting that far so far. Okay. I think we agree. So then Austin Cowles also includes his testimony on the subject. Then we have these. These are not sworn affidavits, but they are statements as claims as much as any of the other claims made in the prior document we talked about John C. Bennett. You have these other individuals. You have the Higbee brothers I talked about before. Again, these were people that were relied on by the church, including Joseph, to swear affidavits talking about what a scoundrel John C. Bennett is. Of course, if with more time, we could go into their exact accusations. But here in the Nauvoo Expositor, Francis Higbee says he accused Smith of trying to assassinate former church members who opposed him and aired personal grievances related to Smith's abuse of power. Chauncey Higbee testified that Smith had used his position as the prophet to make several inappropriate advances towards women. And then the Foster brothers, Robert and Charles Foster, and Charles Ivins, all alleged the coercive environment Smith had created in Nauvoo's political and religious structure. Now, those are not affidavits, but they are claims that were included in the Expositor.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So after that, there was a public nuisance meeting at the Nauvoo City Council, in which there was...
Let me just pause for a moment. So in other words, the only actual document is the laws saying, we saw this, Hiram produced it, and nobody can verify what it was that they saw, but there's some details like 10 wives in the here and now and in the afterlife. Something like that. No way to verify the document.
Verifying the document would be difficult to do without any other personal accounts related to it. Yes. Fortunately, there are many accounts to it. But then you have this, but we're not here to talk about that. We're only here to talk about the Nauvoo Expositor. So what happens is not Nauvoo City Council without Wilson Law, who had resigned by that point from the council, was called by the new mayor, who was Joseph Smith. Well, he'd been mayor for a couple of years since the old mayor basically resigned and was he wasn't run out of town, but at least was run out of power. That was John C. Bennett. And so they get together and then they start having basically this big gossip session. They Joseph Smith accused the editors and publishers of the Nauvoo Expositor of printing lies about Smith and about the church, basically saying William Law, Jane Law. He does basically appear to accuse them of lying under oath and of lying in print. He also, several members of the council stood up to talk about the fact that at least Joe Jackson had been guilty of counterfeiting and involved in counterfeiting in that business, and that there was a conspiracy. Hiram Smith stood up and said that he alleged that Joe Jackson had told him that William Law had offered him $500 to kill John C. Bennett. Are you signaling to me there, Jacob? I didn't see.
Are these like minutes taken at the meeting?
Yeah. I can have those pulled up if we need them.
I'm just wondering, because I don't want to get too far off track. I just want to make sure people know how to read this for themselves. We're reading things on a slide, sure. And I know we have to be brief so we can keep moving along. But people would read this in the minutes for themselves.
Yep, absolutely. These are in the minutes for the Nauvoo City Council meeting on Joseph Smith Papers, which is actually a very well put together website that the church deserves great credit for. Yeah. Also, that accusations of adultery in 18. Whoops, this is the wrong slide. Adultery. Hiram Smith accused Jackson of trying to steal his daughter. Hiram's daughter said that William Law had confessed to cheating on Jane, and that God had struck him with disease for it, and that he apparently did that from his deathbed. That Hiram had also accused Joe Jackson of confessing to having, and then in the minutes it's blotted out as just a line, censored out for posterity. The presumption being, and it is only presumption, that he was referring to some sort of venereal disease. And so anyways, there's basically a whole bunch of ad hominem attack. When people say ad hominem, what are we talking about? We're talking about attacking the logic of somebody's argument by, or you know, in this case, the argument of the Nauvoo expositor, by attacking their moral character and saying that they are low, more immoral people, which unfortunately is a very effective way of people arguing. But logically speaking, it doesn't hold a whole lot of water. If you're going to say that somebody is a bad person, okay. Any Christian who says, well, you can't believe the word of this person, they're a bad person, is really not being honest to even their religion, because according to Christianity, no one is a truly good person. Only Jesus is perfect, and everybody's going to commit sins. The question here is, even if all of these things are true, now I'm not going to go in and rehash all of these things, because here's my point. Let's take all this as true and say, so what? Does any of that mean that the accounts made by the Higbees, by Charles Ivins, by the Fosters, by the Laws, by Austin Cowles in the Nauvoo Expositor are perjury? No, none of it. Okay, now you can go roundabout back doorways to say counterfeiting is a kind of lying. Okay, so is cheating on your taxes, blah, 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 blah. And the reason why ad hominem attacks are so very poor is because they can be turned back around on somebody. So that's where I'm just getting up to date on the story here. So as a consequence of this 2-day meeting about the Nauvoo expositor, Joseph ordered the Nauvoo police to burn the office down, destroy the press, and destroy every copy they could get. So this is now just to be clear, if Joseph Smith is confident that the Nauvoo expositor is libelous, what he's doing here is destroying evidence at the least. In addition, what he's doing is inciting a riot. He's got the police at this time are an all-volunteer police force, and he basically orders a building burnt down. There's no reason to do that. He could just close the printing office. Even destroying the printing press is over the top. But under the rubric of that, the Nauvoo City Charter includes a clause that they can declare anything a public nuisance. They can and handle it however they want. Joseph Smith effectively has violated the First Amendment rights of William Law and the other publishers of the Expositor. He has incited a riot. We could go into all of this, but the point here that I just want to get onto the next slide here is that Joseph Smith destroyed the argument he could make to use this same document, use this same office to come after William Law legally. He obviously just wants the Nauvoo expositor to go away and to intimidate people. Next, I will say, and I'm going to get called out because this is a lie. An eye for an eye leaves Joseph Smith with at least -2 eyes. It's an old Japanese proverb. No, it isn't. That's a lie. I'm just disclaiming it right here, Jacob. I'm lying there. It's a joke. All right. If we talk about libel and slander, we can talk about that in 1844. I'm just going to go over this real quickly. Francis Higbee sued Joseph Smith for libel, saying that he had published articles about him in the Nauvoo Neighbor, but it became kind of a lightning rod for other people to come forward with similar character attacks on Joseph Smith for saying that he had libeled them in church publications. Counterfeiting, we talked about the fact that Joe Jackson's been accused of counterfeiting in that meeting. In 1837, Warren Parrish testified that Joseph Smith, who was the cashier of the Kirtland Safety Society Anti-Banking Company, had printed the notes of the KSS ABC as fraudulent currency, leading the Saints into utter ruin. That the claims about conspiring to kill John C. Bennett. I am looking for this quote. I'm just going to state this. I have not been able to find it. I know I have it somewhere that John C. Bennett had actually included in History of the Saints, that Joseph had threatened him directly and told him that he could have him drowned and no one would notice. And then as far as adultery, we all remember the famous scrape incidents in 1838. Oliver Cowdery, who was Joseph Smith's associate in publishing the Book of Mormon, had confronted Joseph about a, quote, filthy, nasty affair or scrape with a teenager named Fanny Alger. This was among the earliest, but certainly not the last of the claims that Joseph Smith had committed adultery, and including several claims that he had disguised it, as John C. Bennett did, by claiming that it was actually polygamy, and so therefore not technically adultery. Okay, and this is my last slide, Jacob, and then we can go at each other here. So this is the case I am making here. The destroying the Nauvoo expositor destroyed Joseph Smith's credibility, or whatever was left of it. And I just want to say thank you, Jacob. In case we run out of time, thank you for being willing to go into the lion's den with me. And I look forward to showing you some things if I have them. Again, I wasn't able to come as prepared as I would like.
Oh, awesome. I thought when you were saying this is my last slide, I thought you were going for one more. You did it?
Nope, that's it. This is the one.
So let me do a little bit of recap. Hey, and let me apologize how hard I hit you earlier. Sometimes I gotta get myself calmed down. The evidence of Joseph Smith, the polygamist from the Nauvoo expositor, it sounds like the strongest evidence that you're pointing to is details mentioned by Jane Law and others about 10 wives later surfaced in what Brigham Young published in 1852 in the Deseret News. Is there anything stronger than that as far as physical evidence that people can look at? But accusations are one thing, and people can attribute motives for the accusation. But as far as physical evidence, details from Jane Law about 10 wives and other details later surfaced in the 1852 Deseret News document from Brigham Young.
No. So my claim, because here's the thing, my claim, the central claim of the debate and the argument, again, the resolution, is that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. And in his living life, taught it, said that it was, and practiced it.
Maybe I'm not asking it well enough. In other words, I'm asking for the evidence in the Nauvoo expositor, because there's lots of accusations. What evidence do we have to go off of? Is the strongest evidence details mentioned by Jane Law about the revelation she claims to have read that later surfaced in the Deseret News Brigham Young document 1852? Is there stronger evidence that we can examine than that?
I'm not making that claim.
Okay, because I totally get it that people are going to make accusations, and I don't even feel like hashing out the accusations. I'll let them stand on their own. I feel like Joseph Smith stands on his own when he would publicly say, "You put my accusers in court with me, and I will prove them all to be perjurers." Okay, great. And whether he's credible or not, I find him to be credible. When I'm asking for evidence to examine of him practicing polygamy, all that we've got right now, Jane Law mentioned details that were later published by Brigham Young in 1852. Therefore, Joseph Smith must have been a polygamist. I would love some evidence. You are positively saying Joseph Smith practiced polygamy because these people accuse him without evidence.
Okay. Again, so the accusation that I'm making here has nothing to do specifically with Brigham Young, DNC 132. I mentioned those because those are interesting facts about the correlation there. But the claims, at least that we are talking about here, and as credible as they are, is that in other words, there was a polygamy revelation that was shown to, according to them, their claims are that they saw the revelation, that it was about polygamy, that it was teaching polygamy, that and it was instructing Joseph Smith to teach it to other people and get them to participate.
Let me just verify. So what you're referring to, they are making a claim that they've seen evidence. They can't even produce evidence in the form of the document that they're alluding to.
Right, because it had been returned according to their claim to the angel Moroni. I'm sorry, not to the angel Moroni, to Hiram.
No, you're good. Having just listened to all these slides on there, it sounds like there's no physical evidence for anyone to examine. At least in the slides that we covered, there's only accusations, which you find credible. And for me, I have plenty of bias in favor of Joseph Smith, and I know that people will take it into the equation that I believe he was an honest man, that he can, when he says, "I will prove them all to be perjurers," he means it because he knows it. So again, it's like when Jane Law says, "I've seen a document," that's physical evidence. Yeah, if you can provide the document, it's evidence. Otherwise, you're just making an accusation with zero evidence. It's William Law wants to take over the church. Higbees have their own motives. Just show some physical evidence. If he was stooping 30 plus women in the prime of their reproductive years, he himself having brought 9 babies into the world with Emma, why don't you have a single child to show? Give us some evidence.
Oh, well, that's very plain. I mean, we could talk about that, but here, what I'm talking about here in terms of the Nauvoo expositor.
In other words, do you maintain your position that the Nauvoo expositor proves Joseph was a polygamist? I get the claims. Some people will believe the accusers, but you and I just went through a bunch of slides, and you literally have zero evidence. You have you have Jane and William Law saying, I read a document. Great. You're testifying to evidence that nobody else in the world can corroborate. There's there's zero physical evidence.
The claim, so the claim was not that they read a document. The claim that and I can go back and read it again, I don't think I need to, is that they were shown this document specifically.
In other words, their testimony. I read about 10 women in the afterlife, and then in 1852,
their sworn testimony.
In other words, in their sworn testimony, 8+ years later, Brigham Young publishes a document which has those details, and Brigham Young says that was from Joseph Smith. Trust me. In other words,
Brigham Young didn't ever claim it in affidavit.
In other words, the document that Jane is referring to is not in the Nauvoo expositor, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it was given back to the angel.
The document that Jane and William Law claim to have read, was it published anywhere else prior to Brigham Young publishing September 14th, 1852?
I'm not making that claim. What the claim we're making here is about Joseph Smith teaching polygamy.
In other words, you're asking the audience to land in the affirmative that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, when not only do you not have a document, all you have is a couple of people saying, I read a document which you will never be able to read for yourself. Just trust us. Give us something physical.
What I'm saying is, and it would be great if there was a stained dress somewhere, as there is now for Tim Ballard, by the way. That would be great if there was some kind of physical evidence, like a stained blue dress. There wasn't.
It would bring this. It would bring this beyond accusation, because it's pretty obvious that whether it's politics or religion or business, there can be some dramatic falling out. The Nauvoo expositor makes it very clear there's very dramatic falling out, and people are probably going to make the strongest case that they can against the people. William Law wants to take over all of the converts that were following Joseph Smith. Zero evidence.
That's plausible. But that he would.
In other words, the document that he's referring to doesn't exist. Something got published by Brigham Young 8+ years later.
But what is the rubric?
But zero corroborating evidence. Zero corroborating evidence. Nothing. No.
Well, that's not true, though. That's not true. So I would say that I mean, we can go in at length if we want to talk about from a historical perspective. Are the claims of William and Jane Law verified in independent accounts? That I would say is evidence. I don't need a physical evidence in order to say, look, if you have 2, 3, 4 people talking about the same document, they use their own language to describe it. Some of those are firsthand, some of those are secondhand accounts. Okay, the firsthand accounts are better than the secondhand accounts. We all agree to that. But if the thing they're attesting to, both of them, is the same thing, you have to at least take into account, unless you have proof that one of them is lying, or valid, good, sensible reason to say one of them is lying. You have to at least be at least able to say there is some correlation that may equal causation in that situation.
It sounds like there's some details that match up, which does bode well for those if details line up. Okay, maybe there's something to it, especially if these people aren't corroborating with each other. I don't know if that's the case. Have you come to the conclusion that what is currently public, that the document that was published by Brigham Young, September 1452, which is the current section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants, have you come to the conclusion that's what Jane and William Law were referring to?
I think it's kind of a Q document, to be honest with you. I'm not trying to win so much here. I'm trying to answer you honestly, Jacob. I think it's kind of a Q document situation. I think that whatever document they are both referencing is if it's not an original document, it's a similar document, And I'm perfectly willing to go as far as to say, do I think that Brigham Young morally capable of fraudulently forging a revelation from Joseph Smith as a way to, exert some kind of power? I think he's totally capable of that. I don't really see your logic in why.
You and I are in agreement about that and Brigham Young. So, in other words, hey, I'm totally cool with that level of agreement. In other words, we cannot verify that what Jane and William Law were talking about is the document that Brigham Young produced September 14th, 1852.
That I can go as far as to say, yes, similar to that is to say it is a separate polygamy document claiming that Joseph Smith received a revelation ordering him to practice and teach polygamy to others that was shown by Hiram to William and Jane Law and to others.
Do you know of any other candidate that could be that document other than Brigham Young's 1852 publication?
That I know of, no. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it does mean that.
But you're right.
In other words, I don't consider myself an expert on all the sources. I try to ask some pretty good questions, because if somebody is positively claiming this man was married in the carnal sense to more than 30 women, there's right now, as far as this discussion goes, zero physical evidence, only some details that are in harmony with a few different people making accusations. That's as close as we get. It would be much stronger if we can show, look, Joseph Smith published a previous draft and we were able to verify this. I know something like that would make it much stronger, but it sounds like it just doesn't exist in the Nauvoo Expositor. If we're going to accuse, I'm just thinking about somebody that you care about, because I care about Joseph Smith. I have a very positive bias in his favor. Imagine somebody saying, your great grandpa was cheating on your great grandma with 12+ women. We know it because look at this accusation. Look at that accusation.
Can I ask a question?
Give me something. Is there something beyond the accusations? Yeah, hit me, Heidi.
I actually have a question. What was the thing that made you believe that Joseph Smith was not a polygamist? What brought you, other than I know the personal revelation part? Well, but I'm curious if you found anything. Yeah.
Just so you understand me, I was, from my teenage years, I've known that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. That is the history of the church that I was told. My father was a convert in his 20s. He was an abnormally studious person, learning the early history of the church. So for me, I knew that dozens of women he was married to. I could teach that principle clearly in a way to where when I was in my 20s and in my 30s, I was the guy that most likely, when people were reading things on the internet and it's keeping them from wanting to investigate more into the church, not become members, they would call me up and I'd spend hours with people. I'm telling you, I had zero issue with it. Like mentally and spiritually, I'm already polygamist, at least spiritually. When God commands it again, I ain't got no issue with it. I had a buddy that challenged me, why do you think Joseph Smith was a polygamist? And it was the first time in my life that I even considered, is that even possible that Joseph Smith wasn't a polygamist? Here's the incredibly short version. When I exclusively went to the 3 different essays provided by the church on the subject of polygamy, they use about 100 or so citations. Most of those are available on josephsmithpapers.org or else other places that are pretty easy to investigate and read the original documents for yourself. In the vast majority of cases, I would say in 75% or more of the cases, I would just read the entire original document for myself. The pattern that stood out to me the clearest, well over 90% of the citations used by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to claim what Joseph Smith was a polygamist was from 30 years after his death. So that's I was expecting, when I was investigating this topic, that I'm going to see more like, okay, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I was expecting it to stack up probably on both sides. This was lopsided. In other words, what made the most sense to me in the simplest way, this is a narrative created about Joseph Smith after his death. Okay, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but clearly the citations used by those antagonistic towards the church, like the Mormon Stories podcast, as well as those in favor of the church, like the current historian employed by the corporate church, they're all relying upon the narrative created decades after his death. I'm done.
Okay.
Okay. Let me ask you this though. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Heidi, in case you're going in a direction here.
No,
but
I just was curious. Yeah.
This is a curiosity for me because
then let me just give this last little bit. So logically, I'm like, hey, and it caused me to pray. Like I very much rely upon, okay, logically working it out so I can present my conclusions in a prayerful manner to my maker. It was in that I got an answer that that was life-changing, and it caused some actions. I won't get into that whole story, but I'm going to say, for me to be honest in front of my maker, I have to be able to honestly delineate. When somebody asks me anything, Jacob, why do you believe that? My conscience requires me to be able to say, well, because of this and this and that. I can give kind of a chronology on how I came to whatever conclusion I believe in. On the Joseph Smith one,
I just asked that for both of you because as you guys know, me and Jacob spoke before, but I'm more on the occultic side of things and I didn't know all this. So that's why I don't know much
about I've super enjoyed like Heidi's presentations on the occult aspect that's being attributed to Joseph Smith. I haven't felt the spiritual inclination to dig into that yet, but on the polygamy topic, like I feel like Joseph Smith is clearly vindicated. In other words, overwhelming. Like there's as I've been asking for it, digging for it, like going to the antagonistic and pro Joseph Smith, the anti-Joseph Smith sources, nobody has anything to show Joseph Smith ever did this. There's accusations like the ones you mentioned here, but they have zero physical evidence to back it up.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a long claim. This is the curiosity that I have. Okay. So, but it does seem to me like you were making, Heidi's pulling up the Nauvoo Expositor. I told you guys that I would pull that up. I am delivering. This is the William Law's affidavit. And in a second here, I'll scroll up to James. But is that close enough? Let me get closer to it.
I can see that pretty much.
You see that? Okay, good. This window is tiny.
Okay. This. I hereby certified that.
Sorry. Let me get it there. Let me get. Oh, for heck's sake! Let's see. I might have to download the document.
You're still using the Mormon swear words.
No, trust me. Heidi will tell you.
Being good because we're on live.
I'm being good more for you.
But I will say, Heidi has.
I'll tell you what. Exmo Joe. Hex for those who don't believe in Gosh. Okay.
Like Joe brings that up and makes it bigger. I will say that I find it interesting as a pneumo. Also, I want to mention Jacob doesn't believe in the temple stuff. He doesn't believe in the wearing the garments, none of the things. I find that fascinating because Jacob's the first pneumo I ever met. And I didn't know it was a thing.
I'm a pretty good.
This is my curiosity.
Let me hit hit me with your curiosity. I'm just so anxious to read it.
This idea about 8 years later, 10 years later, 30 years later, being evidence that there is some cause to doubt the claims made by people who are recalling Joseph Smith. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up the Nauvoo Expositor is I think the weakness in the argument is there's a contemporary account of multiple persons living in Joseph Smith's living puff who can testify, no, there's a revelation. These are some details about it. Joseph Smith had to do with polygamy. I was one of them. Okay, so that exists with the Nauvoo Expositor. But what I do find interesting...
The accusations exist, not the physical evidence.
Correct. But the question here is then, why would that... I'm just curious about this. Why is the contemporariness of the Nauvoo Expositor better evidence than the claims about Joseph Smith's polygamy from his wives or alleged wives or his alleged conspirators like Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball and so forth 8, 10, 30 years down the road? What difference does it make if it's 8, 10, 30 years down the road?
I have one more question. I'm so sorry.
Keep your question. Don't lose it. I just want to make sure that I respond to that. Heber C. Kimball, Brigham Young, and others, they moved however many hundreds of miles, was it 1,000 miles that they moved away to establish in Utah? They literally have an empire to keep under control. And if they are perceived as not having authority that came from Joseph Smith, it would undercut their own authority. So in other words, they have to maintain that narrative. Oh, the many wives and concubines that we're practicing. Oh, trust us. It really did come from the person that led you to have the spiritual experience to believe in the Book of Mormon and in this restoration work. They were not only borrowing heavily, they were founded upon the good credit in the testimony of Joseph Smith. And that's why they had to maintain that narrative for their own credibility.
I mean, I could argue with you, but I'm not about that right now because I am actually about steel manning this argument. Because here's the question here. So what I'm understanding there is it's not so much the time that has lapsed between Joseph Smith's life and living memory and the memory of the people, 10, 20, 30 years. It's not so much the time, but the distance and the circumstances that imply some kind of conflict of interest. Is that a fair way of saying what you're claiming here?
Yeah, there's some conflict of interest, but even more than that, if the claim is Joseph Smith had 30 plus women he was married to in the carnal sense, there's got to be something physical. There's no records. Like even the mafiosos were keeping records of their transactions. There's nothing. In other words, you had on a previous slide the happiness letter. What a fallacious piece of crap! It was published in a newspaper, supposed to be a journal entry that was from a week later after it ended up getting published in there. I would recommend going to Hemlock Knots, looking up the happiness letter. That does not hold water. There's not a single love letter from Joseph Smith to any woman. There's not a single account of him trying to have his last goodbye with some other women other than Emma. All of the things that just seems would be reasonable. If you claim he's married to 30 plus women in the carnal sense, why can't you show him with any of them having a carnal marriage relationship?
I mean, have a question about Fanny Alger. So Fanny Alger is documented in her own testimony to have had a relationship with Joseph, and she wrote a book in her own hands, so it is hers. And her statement.
I'm pretty familiar with the Fanny Alger case. In other words, according to the Mormon historians trying their best to attach Fanny Alger to Joseph Smith, the document can I share my screen real quick? I'll just show you.
I'm just curious. Yes, and I'm asking this not to debate. I'm seriously curious because I don't know. Good.
I'll just show you. I'll just show you the conclusion that's come to by the Mormon historians. I'll just say it because I pretty much have it memorized. The document from the church essays that's called Plural Marriage in Nauvoo. There's one paragraph on Fanny Alger, and the first three words are fragmentary evidence suggest that, and then they talk about Fanny Alger. In other words, those most incentivized to verify that Fanny Alger was Joseph Smith's wife, they have to concede that they don't have any conclusions. All they have is fragmentary evidence that suggests.
His cousin, right? Oliver Cowdery saw them
Fanny
together.
Alger
Not saying that makes a marriage. Not saying that makes a marriage. You can have a problem. You know what I mean?
If Fanny Alger has ever acknowledged that relationship, I have never seen a source produced by anybody antagonistic to Joseph Smith or anybody in favor of Joseph Smith, the polygamist.
Okay, but I hear you there. But you don't. But then the question becomes, and of course we have to go here. I mean, I feel like we're doing good on the Nauvoo Expositor. Now I'm curious about this. Is that okay? But we do agree that Oliver Cowdery did claim an affair with Fanny Alger.
He used the phrase scrape, which was considered a low word. And I wonder what that meant, because like I might use the word hoe to describe somebody, and that's not necessarily a vulgarity, but it would be considered a low word. And in certain publications, they wouldn't want that word to be used. I don't know if scrape was that low of a word, but there was a different set of handwriting that crossed out the word scrape and used the word affair, which could be a physical relationship, but also we refer to affairs as a business affair and things of that nature. So in other words, that's what we have to go off of. I have a rather positive bias in favor of Oliver Cowdery. I do not believe Oliver Cowdery was making false accusations. William Law, I'm more suspicious of just because of his motivations to become the president and prophet of his own church. Oliver Cowdery, these are the times to where I wish somebody like Joe Rogan could just get 3 hours out of somebody using their BS detector. It would be fun to listen to. We don't have that. All we have
is I asked about Fanny because she it was noted that something happened there. Yeah, and I do think like you, Cowdery is more of a trustworthy human as far as, I mean, it was his family, you know. Yeah. He had more skin in the game.
So that's the question.
I don't think
that's the question.
There's no indication that Oliver Cowdery was trying to take over something built by Joseph Smith in any way. So If Oliver has an accusation, I'm more inclined to believe that that he really believes there's a reason to bring it up. He does not,
because they sealed her, right? They sealed her to him.
There's you know what, decades later people are claiming that, and again, I just do not trust these accounts from decades later from people who
and
are
I'm
trying to
asking because I do not.
Oh, I'm there with you.
Literally.
I'm there with you on that, Jacob.
I don't know.
You got the Exmo community with you on that one, Jacob IsBell.
Yeah,
there is no evidence whatsoever of Fanny Alger having been married in her living breath to Joseph Smith.
Correct.
That doesn't exist that I know. But the claims about her having had an affair with Joseph do exist.
An affair or a scrape is definitely. I find it very reasonable.
Could have been a kiss back then. For all we know.
Yeah, but no, here's why I'm saying that, but I just want to throw this out there. Okay. So if we're going to say, okay, we at least can agree, it seems to me that you're saying that whatever conflict of interest that might exist for William Law doesn't exist for Oliver Cowdery. Correct. Because in 1838, Oliver Cowdery isn't trying to start off a branch of Mormonism, the true church.
And it's his cousin. Yeah.
Okay. And there's a lot of credibility to Oliver Cowdery, I would say.
Well, I'll say something. It is very difficult for us to go in and dig for original sources. It is so much easier. And I find so much benefit when I'm trying to consume news or learn a topic. I pretty much go to a subject matter expert and I feel like, well, I can rely upon what they tell me. And I realize it's tough for me to just say, Exmo Joe, tell me the original source of that. And I know it's a pretty high standard. But what I found on this subject in particular, when there's a narrative that makes sense that we are inclined to repeat, when we get asked, so what's that based off of? On the subject of Joseph Smith's polygamy, it's almost always long time later. Probably Oliver Cowdery might be the best example of, hey, this sounds as close to an actual accusation of sexual impropriety as exists. And even then, okay, how are we going to interpret the word scrape? Crossed out. How are we going to interpret the word affair? We don't have either of them to be able to say it. But it sounds like Oliver Cowdery at least became agreeable to where, well, I'm not accusing Joseph of adultery. And I won't speculate beyond that. And I'm hesitant to trust those who want to speculate things that aren't actually in the record. What the record says, Oliver brought up the word scrape. It was crossed out, turned into the word affair, and we have to interpret what that means.
Let's be clear, because not everybody at home knows about this, the context of this scrape situation. Okay, so Oliver Cowdery had a letter book that he kept. That was a common thing back in those days when you couldn't auto reply yourself on an email, right? He would get his nephew to copy down his letters into a blank journal, and his nephew had written the word scrape and then crossed it out and put affair over the top of it. Then this letter that's being talked about, though, was a letter that was sent at the request of the church to brethren in the High Council who were in the process of deciding if they were going to kick Oliver Cowdery, out of the church. And one of the charges that they were accusing him of all of which were pretty well validated, was accusing Joseph Smith of committing adultery with a girl who lived in his house. So, I mean, and then at the end of the day, the decision of the High Council in Kirtland was that he was guilty of accusing Joseph Smith of committing adultery.
I don't think that was the outcome. I don't believe there was any outcome to that effect.
Oh, well,
no,
I may be wrong, but let me pull it up.
In other words, I do not believe that was the outcome that Joseph Smith has ever found guilty of any impropriety.
No. I'm sorry. I didn't say, that's not what I said. I misrepresented myself there. Okay. I'm saying Oliver Cowdery was found guilty of accusing Joseph Smith of committing adultery.
Yeah. In other words, So in other words, what you're saying is Oliver Cowdery was accused of a false accusation.
I'm saying I didn't say that. Oh, I said he was accused of. We agree that he, in this letter and to these brethren, and in the conversation, because they also reference conversations they had immediately following his confrontation of Joseph Smith, that witnesses and the letter, so spoken testimony and proof, well, at least proof by the hand of Oliver Cowdery, is that he had accused Joseph Smith of having an affair of scrape and or affair with Fanny Alger, and that the High Council, under Joseph Smith's direction, decided that that was an affair, that adultery specifically.
I don't believe that was the outcome. They found Joseph Smith having committed an affair.
No, right. But they found Oliver Cowdery guilty of accusing Joseph Smith of having an affair.
Okay, yeah. So Oliver made the accusation. I wish I knew it better. I know that it wasn't the outcome. I can't remember if it was determined. Yes, Oliver Cowdery is accusing an affair. Yeah, the wording scrape and affair, it can very reasonably be interpreted that way, and I won't fault people for coming to that conclusion.
Okay. I'm sorry to open that can of worms. I just
that's okay.
You had to go there.
Legitimately
you had to go there.
I'm sorry. I don't know that much about the polygamy part.
Yeah.
I just thought it was true. Yeah.
That's what. Yeah.
Okay, but I do want to say that I think it's interesting about by the way, in case people are asking, I haven't been looking at what did I do? I can go and reference or show you guys the Jane Law. Anyways, I'll be doing that. So I am curious though about this. So the time elapsing thing is one of the things that was a big hang up for me in deciding to go with this question about the Nauvoo expositor, just because the Nauvoo expositor is contemporary. But it's like whenever we talk about proving history, if we're talking about 10 years, 30 years later becomes a problem. I had thought maybe you were suggesting they don't remember it correctly, or that they could be missing details that are important. For example, we know with some plausible, I'm going to open this can of worms. For example, the Gospels that were written about the life of Jesus, the ones that are considered authentic through the mainstream of Christianity are easily written at least 30, 40 years after Jesus's life. Do they come from more original sources? We don't know. There's some reason to believe so. But things like this. So people who are, for example, mythicists, who say that Jesus was never a man, he was always a myth, and so forth, will make the claim, okay, 30, 40 years later down the road, you don't know who the author of the Gospels actually are. And there are all kinds of disagreements and anachronisms with history and with the accounts themselves. And then they go into it, and that's one of the claims for which people make the accusation that the Gospels should not be taken literally or too strictly as historical accounts of the life of Jesus. Is this 30, 40 years down the road question? But it sounds like you're not making that claim. Yeah. Is that right?
Regarding the Gospels, it at least has to be taken into the account the physical limitations of record keeping at that time. It sounds like Luke, who's the author of the Gospel according to Luke, as well as the book of Acts, he makes clear that he gathered a whole bunch of testimonies from those that knew Jesus from the early days. So it's kind of like somebody putting together their blog based upon accounts. Okay, even though I believe those testimonies, I add into my mental / spiritual equation, well, they've got limitations in how they're able to keep these records. And it's But if they're saying, well, Jesus built between 30 and 40 different homes in his day as a carpenter, then there'd be a little bit more, hey, where can we find any of these? Can we find somebody who lived in any of these homes? And there would at least be an expectation of some physical evidence available 30 to 40 years later after he supposedly built these houses, just to go with a hypothetical situation. When the accusation is Joseph Smith had carnal marital relations with 30 plus women, many of them in the prime of their reproductive years, okay, where's the physical evidence that would indicate that was the case?
Yeah, what evidence are you suggesting would exist?
Babies.
Okay, which babies? Where do we have babies?
Joseph Smith and Emma brought in 9 children into the world via Joseph Smith. We know that Emma was fertile. We know that Joseph Smith was capable of impregnating her and bringing babies. Now, when the positive claim is 30 plus women, many of them in the prime of their reproductive years, why 0 babies? Okay.
So first of all, I would say there's some discussion to be had on the fertility of Joseph and Emma in 1844. And that's an interesting conversation, a little bit gross, but we can have it.
Is 9 babies? Is that in
Well, how many babies? How many stillborn babies are we talking about?
Yeah,
How many badly?
In other words, as far as Emma becoming pregnant 9 times.
Okay, but here's what I'm saying. Okay, so to make the claims that today, what really the claim would have to be today, there would be living people with Joseph Smith's DNA and somebody else's DNA besides Emma's in their background living today to track that.
Here's what would
are we?
Well, here's what would be less strong. Here's what would be less strong, but at least something. If there was any woman saying Joseph Smith impregnated me, but the baby didn't survive, there's not even those accusations. The few women that did say to their child, Joseph Smith is your father, have been proven inaccurate. In other words, some people can explain it. Well, it's obvious she was sleeping with Joseph Smith at the time, even though he wasn't the father. Well, show something. So there's a couple of women who claimed that their child came from Joseph Smith, only to be proven false. But there's no women who say I lost a baby that came from Joseph Smith.
Let's take a Mender's game.
Stairs. Wait, what about the one that Emma threw down the stairs?
Eliza Arsenault, I think she's so full of crap.
Yeah,
in other words, she's here's my bias regarding.
Remember, I only know this much.
Yeah. So Eliza Arsenault was key for many wives and concubines becoming the doctrine in Utah. I find her to be a disreputable woman. When you have a woman working on behalf of this man to normalize the systematized abuse and chattel slavery of women in the sexual nature through promoting polygamy in Utah, I have no respect for Eliza Arsenault.
Wow, I half agree with that statement. That's disturbing.
And I didn't know
just the latter half. But yeah,
I knew the story.
Here's what I'm saying though. But if you're making a logical argument about the numerical, if you're gaming the game theory about there would be living descendants or at least an account of descendants somewhere of Joseph Smith and these other women. The claim we're making is that because he had had sex with them. That's where we're going with that, right? Sex means babies. But does sex mean babies every time? Of course not. We agree with that, right?
No, not every time.
A healthy.
I'd have a million. No, just joking.
A healthy.
Oh my gosh, Jacob.
A healthy normal reproductive rate, we're talking not even like 1 in 4, right? So if you were to say, for example, just take the lowest common denominator, say did Joseph Smith have sex with each of his wives at least once? And you say, okay, well, how many wives are we talking about the accusation? Some as high as 40, some as low as 34. Even the church says 34. So let's say 34. If Joseph Smith had sex with each wife one time, consummated the marriage just one time, that's enough to satisfy the claim Joseph Smith married women so that he could have sex with them. Now, right? So I think we can agree to that much. In a healthy instance, you would say, okay, let's take 1 in 4, which is a high number, a high number for a healthy person, and which I don't think that Joseph Smith really fits that bill. But if you were say 1 in 4 out of 34, and then those pregnancies definitely carried fully to term, without miscarriages, without journal entries, without recordings of them being born, without people lying to the children, telling them that they're actually the product of another marriage because Joseph was dead. Your numbers cut down really, really fast if you can make the claim Joseph Smith had sex with his wives, but at least only once. And so I would say that's a good, valid argument for why somebody could say, numerically speaking, you wouldn't necessarily have issue, recorded or living issue today with DNA that you could test, just for the claim that Joseph Smith had sex with his wives. I think we can agree to that.
I will say this. I'm kind of looking just because that there is some affidavits affirming that Joseph did stay overnight with certain wives. But I mean, again, we're talking.
Are they affidavits that would impress Jacob? Because I mean,
Joseph, I'm sure he knows what they are. Joseph B. Noble gave a court deposition saying that he spent the night with Louisa at home and he saw them in bed together.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Let me I'm gonna make if you'll share my screen for just a
Yes,
moment.
of course.
I can take mine down if that helps.
Yeah. Yeah. See if that will help. There we go.
I'm just gonna hit present.
Okay.
Share
All
screen. There's one that I really like, and it's a 2-part episode, so it's about 4 hours total. But share screen.
No.
Yeah, it's good. Hold on, I just gotta hit this.
Okay.
Oh, entire screen. Here we go. Okay, now you should be able to add it on there.
Oh, there it is. Okay, just making sure it was
Hopefully, it
working.
doesn't
There we go.
glitch me too much. So right now, I love how homework heavy and original source oriented that Michelle Brady Stone is. Episodes 76 and 77 is specifically the novel polygamy statistics and the problem of no children. So they've got about 4 hours there. I would recommend people dig into that. That's one of the easiest ones. For me, I consider this much more kind of like a spiritual battle. I will say it is much more reasonable that those in the Exmo crowd who view Joseph Smith as a con man would not trust his account on things. Now, my personal ministry as well as efforts, it's primarily among people who claim that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. So they're speaking out both sides of their mouth. Oh, he was honest about these things, yet he was doing this. All I did,
and for this Exmo, I do believe that he was mostly truthful and that he saw things and people just didn't understand what he saw. So that I know that's weird, but that's where I stand.
Yeah,
that he wasn't lying.
If you type in YouTube 132 problems Peter J. Brown wives, that'll get this one, because it's a long conversation. But I'll say the claims of, oh, they must have been using some sort of birth control, must have been doing that, or statistically that's the case. The argument is made much better in this episode, and it would be way too long, and I wouldn't do it justice for me to engage in it. That's why I just try to be as straightforward regarding my biases as possible. I believe that Joseph Smith was honest about this, and the reason why there isn't the physical evidence is because it's consistent with Joseph Smith being truthful about it. Those who practice polygamy saying that it came from Joseph Smith, they're going to be saying it more and more, because as the years go by, they have to continue to justify their continued practice of many wives and concubines.
And when you say, though, that Joseph Smith being honest, you're talking about Joseph Smith being honest in published statements that he meant to be public during his lifetime, right? Because, I mean, of course, the stickiness of that becomes, well, if you say, well, Joseph Smith being honest, you have people who you have myriad examples of people who say Joseph Smith, like William Law, that Joseph or Hiram came to me and talked to me separately, not in a public format. Or you have the journal of Joseph Smith, or his official, the record of the president of the church is kept by Willard Richards and by Eliza Snow and by William Clayton. And so you have those. And so are those, then you get into this sticky game of, is something written by Willard Richards or William Clayton or Eliza R. Snow in Joseph's living life? Are those records, firsthand accounts, if they are officially the records, they are the official record keeper at the time, authorized by Joseph Smith? And so,
it does look like there's some records of women in their journals saying this, but then again, we get back to gain, why, blah, blah, blah.
Hearsay.
I don't know.
And I can see
not hearsay, direct from the woman, from the woman. Mm-hmm.
Right. But I think that, the argument that Jacob's making there is
the one that I know of where it's the women saying that they were married to Joseph Smith. That was so strong in my mind prior to digging in, is the women signed affidavits saying we truly were married to Joseph Smith. Those affidavits came 30 years after his death, specifically related to the Temple Lot case. The Salt Lake City Church was having a legal dispute with the reorganized church over the Temple Lot in Missouri. The legal case being made is the reorganized church doesn't have any real claim because they were not, Joseph Smith did not choose them to be the successors. Look, Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy. Here's the wives given their affidavits. Now, having done this myself, we can go to josephsmithpapers.org and we can look at these affidavits, and it looks like two different sets of handwriting were writing the same form letter over and over again, leaving this line blank so a name could be filled in later, and somebody putting a signature at the bottom. Just like if Exmo Joe and I were in charge of hand copying 15 copies each of this form letter, like we were sitting next to each other doing it, and then the women ended up signing it. And they became very mousy and very insecure when they were questioned in court regarding the validity of these affidavits. The judge did not believe the claims of polygamy being made by the Salt Lake City Church, even with these 30 affidavits of women saying, we were really married to Joseph Smith, and he found in favor of the reorganized church. I'll even say this. The vast majority of the women claiming to be the previous wives of Joseph Smith were the current wives of two men, Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young. So talk about having incentive to not rock the boat. That's where they're getting their food from.
Okay.
The only ones sorry.
No, go ahead, Heidi.
Say anything major, like out of all the whole list that they have on all these women, that actually have a strong case of sexuality, basically, is 3 women: Emily Partridge, Lucy Walker, and Melissa Lott. That's the only 3 where they say there may be a strong case, and then they give the reasons why, but we don't want to go into like 40 things. But
and I'll just add to that, like the Mormon, the LDS apologetic historians, when they say that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy, that's when they'll say, dynastic sealing, something else. Because it's pretty obvious that if Joseph Smith is guilty of this, he obviously was not living it the way that Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young lived it after his death.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry. I'm trying to do multiple things at the same time here. Okay. And again,
I'm actually getting a pedicure. I'm getting a pedicure right now as well. So
that's fantastic. I'm coming over.
I want one.
Okay, but here's another thing that was curious to me. Now I'm into satisfying my curiosities. Now that I feel like I've made my case, is that you have passages of Joseph Smith's journal in his living life, so not 38 years, 30 years, etc. later, that are recorded in the handwriting of Eliza R. Snow. We know that Eliza R. Snow was, during that time period, had taken over for Willard Richards as the authorized timekeeper for Joseph Smith, because Willard Richards had gone to Massachusetts, if I remember correctly, to collect his family and bring them to Nauvoo. And so, and it's interesting that during that time, you get things that Eliza R. Snow, that fit Eliza R. Snow's narrative, but then the journal continues on from there. I'm curious how you make that, how you make those passages jive. Do you believe that they are actually recorded by Eliza R. Snow, that Joseph Smith authorized those?
I'd have to dig into what Eliza R. Snow claims. Like, I have prejudice against her, but not knowing what it is that she's claiming. What I have found over and over again, when I end up digging into it, there's some pretty clear things on an unrelated topic other than like the veracity of history attributed. After Joseph Smith was dead, there's the story of Brigham Young was transfigured into the visage of Joseph Smith, only to find out, okay, those making those claims, the dates didn't add up and it ends up being hogwash. So if Eliza R. Snow is recording things that corroborate Joseph Smith was indeed practicing this form of spiritual wifery / polygamy, okay, I'd have to see it for myself. I'm just going to be really upfront about my biases against Eliza R. Snow.
Okay. But I mean, do you believe, and I'm just asking you what you believe at this point, would you believe that it is sensible to think that if Eliza R. Snow writes it in Joseph Smith's journal, that's generally called Joseph Smith's journal, it's like officially like the record of the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that Joseph knows what she's recording there and is reviewing it, and it is, if she claims that it happened, then at least something like it happened.
Here's not necessarily. Here's some things that I would want to know. Okay, when did somebody else verify this thing that's being attributed to Joseph Smith's record? Even if it's somebody else writing it, when do we first find out? Willard Richards in particular, if you look up Hemlock Knots, they do a great channel, Changing Church History. That's probably one of the most concise breakdowns of the early Utah church leaders changing the history to fit their polygamist narrative. Willard Richards in general had a habit of leaving blank pages here and then blank pages there. For what purpose? Which would indicate, okay, later he filled in some details when he had it. Okay, so if Eliza R. Snow is, oh, it was recorded in Joseph Smith's record. Okay, how do we know that? Where was it? What was the kind of writing instrument? Is it consistent with other things that we know at the time? And when was the first time that anybody besides those promoting that same narrative were able to examine it for themselves? Those are the kind of questions I would ask myself. So even with me having a negative bias towards Eliza R. Snow, I would still take myself through that process in analyzing whether it's accurate or not.
I see. That answers my question. Just because, it says, like, for example, in June 29th, 1842, there's a journal on the day she's sealed to Joseph Smith, but that's in her journal. Wait a second, no.
Yeah,
that's her journal. I'm sorry. That's
my own father refers to her as Eliza Smith because he's convinced that she is indeed the wife of Joseph Smith, probably in a more real spiritual sense than Emma.
Can I just say this one, whether it's true or not? My favorite one is the William Morgan affair, where he married the wife of William Morgan. But here's the funny thing. And of course, there's no proof. But I mean, they're sealing records, but like you said, who knows when it was done, later, whatever. But she showed up to the funeral in like mourning clothes, and Emma was pissed. And I thought that was hilarious. I don't know if she just had a crush or what, but it was hilarious because I would have whooped her butt. Sounds like Emma was scrappy.
I mean, for me, here's an easy way to kind of understand me and the way that I interpret these things logically and the way that it fits in my spiritual worldview. I do view Joseph Smith as a legitimate prophet of God, that the Book of Mormon is a record that he was commanded to produce. And those practicing polygamy were instrumental in having him killed and taking over the church. That's why I'm as upfront as possible. These polygamists that took over after Joseph Smith, it was prophesied of 3rd Nephi chapter 16, verse 10. I feel like getting it on a tattoo, to where these secret combinations took over. Joseph Smith lost his life as a result of it, and they changed the everlasting covenant into many wives and concubines. I feel like saying bad words, not just heck and gosh.
Okay. Well, you send me off on tangents there. You put me little booby traps in the things that you say.
I put all kinds of side roads with pit stops and Slurpees.
So are you like the RLDS more, Jacob?
I don't really know. I will say this. Earlier tonight, I was hanging out with a couple of dudes from the Church of Jesus Christ, which is the Bicker Tonight offshoot branch. They are a small branch of Mormon restoration people who came through the Sidney Rigdon line.
Right.
And they are super cool Jesus dudes. We sang some songs.
Which is an interesting thing to say, the Sidney Rigdon line, because of course the RLDS, or the Community of Christ Church, is also in effect the Sidney Rigdon line. So it's just kind of, and then, but there are, I think you can agree, there's so many different, including both polygamist and non-polygamist sectarian spinoffs, that it makes for an interesting thing to prove the history of each individual claim. So.
And for me, like, just the spiritual aspect of what I shoot for. Okay, does somebody manifest the spiritual gifts of God that we read about in the scriptures? And so I become very less interested in somebody saying, I can prove it this way or that way. Well, there's certain things that I recognize that people can't fake, and that's the gifts of God. More interested in that than somebody saying, let me just prove my lineage.
And so, okay, so that's the thing that's, again, that I keep coming back to, that's interesting to me, is that it seems to me like you follow this logic that you don't go, as you say, when you prepare yourself for the spiritual witness, which is where you get, like most Mormons. So I'm happy to excise you from the ex-Mormon label and say, well, you really are a new Mormon. Is that you go to God for the spiritual confirmation of what you believe to be true. But first you tried, it seems to me you do follow that Joseph Smith teaching of working it out in your mind first and making sure that the logic is consistent. Yeah. And that's why that's important. Sorry.
Especially like the last 20 years of my life, I've gotten better about it, because I do feel when I meet my maker, for me to be an actual honest person in the way that counts, probably regarding anything. If I were to be asked, Jacob, why do you believe this? Well, I take this into account. I observed this. I did this. And I need to be able to answer honestly. I'm following the truth of anything as best I know how. So when I see people going with the flow, whether it's policies, whether it's business relationships or religious beliefs, if they can't answer to God the reason that they believe they're following the truth, I don't believe they're honest in a way that really counts. So yes, the way that you described it, I have to be able to honestly say, Heavenly Father, I evaluated it this way. I did the best that I could. I presented my conclusion to you, and I'm happy to report I get plenty of times when I have logically come to a conclusion that makes really clear sense, and I think that I'm going to recognize a spiritual affirmation, and I realize I am not having this affirmed. In fact, I'm recognizing I'm probably wrong. That's why I'm not getting the kind of confirmation that lets me feel comfortable moving forward on something. So it's a process. Like I've had sacred experiences to where, like, bam, it's life change, but most of the time it is that struggle of trying to present my conclusions and the truth as best I understand it to God before I feel comfortable actually moving forward.
Okay. So that, I think that's interesting, because I do mean that sincerely, because that was my curiosity, has been my curiosity since the beginning of this, is that you have, for example, the Nauvoo expositor. Let's say that by some miracle, or even not miracle, but by logic, I were able to persuade you, or you were able to persuade you, that the logic does make sense, that these affidavits sworn by these people and stories reported by these people in the Nauvoo expositor really do seem to be true, whether or not they are right in their implications, at least that they are telling the truth. And then you take that to God and say, or take it to the Lord. I'm trying to use respectful language here, is that you take it to the Lord in prayer and ask him, hey, this does seem to make sense to me now that on closer review, now with no ex-Mormons in the room. And you get that stupor of thought, which is, for those at home, I'm not making fun of him. That's a quote from Joseph Smith. You get the stupor of thought, and it's like, no, that doesn't make sense. Then you go with the spiritual witness and not the logic. Is that right?
Yeah. That's what you're describing is pretty similar to where I was at regarding Joseph Smith in 2015. So prayerfully, like I view myself as I'm a missionary for Jesus. And when I'm saying prayers and just kind of thinking like, hey, Heavenly Father, how do I help my friends that have lost their testimony, not only of the church, they've lost their testimony of God and everything. How do I help them? I felt a duty to jump into the uncomfortable history of the church that caused them to stop believing in God altogether. And I refused to look away from it. A lot of John DeLynn, some of the things that I would do when I would hear him have a guest on that makes some pretty severe accusations against Joseph Smith. All right. And then John DeLynn was pretty good about having a guest on Mormon Stories to give the faithful LDS narrative. And almost every single time it was some version of, well, yes, what they said against Joseph Smith that seems so awful, it's all technically true, but let me give you a positive spin how you can look at it. And it was disgusting. It was disgusting. And so, and it like in particular, the behavior of Joseph Smith was awful. It was dark. It was gross. It got darker and grosser. And I refused to look away. Like me wanting to be right with God, I'm telling him, like, I'm not going to look away. I'm not going to stop investigating. I don't care if this turns my world upside down. And I'm telling you, at this time, I'm living in New Mexico. I've got 3 callings. I'm going out with the missionaries. Like you're not going to find a more sincere, active Jesus dude in the church than myself. And that's not tooting my horn. That's saying, like, I love Jesus so much and I only know how, and I want to serve him in the church. It was absolutely disgusting. But then there was a couple of times when it's just like, when I would pull over my car and I would scream a prayer out loud, Heavenly Father, I just want to know the truth. I don't care if it turns my world upside down. I never got an answer telling me, leave the church or Joseph Smith's a fraud, but I'm literally presenting my heart and my mind. Heavenly Father, I don't know how to reconcile this behavior attributed to Joseph Smith only seems like an evil man. I cannot make him, in my mind, into anybody that should be taken seriously on anything regarding God. Never got an answer. I just the closest that I got to an answer at that time is, all right, I recognize God saying, there's more you're going to be shown. Just keep pushing forward. So I just kept serving Jesus the best that I could in the church. The light came back into my life. And now what I described to you there, in 2019, when I had a buddy who said, why do you think Joseph Smith was a polygamist? And I finally investigated, is it possible he wasn't? That darkness that I had felt those years earlier, now the opposite was happening. It's like, this is clicking into place. Not only that, as I'm trying to honestly, logically put this in, holy crap, is it possible that this was made up about him after his death? So that's why it was such an incredible release. Logically, it's just like, this makes more sense. The spiritual answer was life-changing. I won't do that here, but like, because I've shared that story with Heidi and other times, I had an answer that where it's like, boom. I know what answers from God are like, usually in the more subtle sense, to where it's a clarity in your mind. It makes sense, and you feel that confidence moving forward. Most of the time, I struggle to try to get that, but I do. The answer that I got when I prayed whether Joseph Smith ever taught polygamy or practiced polygamy, it was a revelatory experience that went on for hours. I won't tell the story here, but I'm saying I ended up testifying to my elders quorum because I was the elders quorum president of this. I felt like God was happy that I did that. I was happy because I felt God was happy. The next day, I got told to kneel down and say a prayer, and I had a baptism of fire experience to where my sins were forgiven. I felt like 100% peace of conscience. I felt God speaking to me like he was standing next to me for 4 consecutive days in a row, and I've never been the same. So, all right, okay, so some people would attribute that, okay, that's your religious experience, Jacob. I'm at least saying, if you want to know why I feel confident moving forward and a sense of duty moving forward, I feel like Joseph Smith is vindicated against the accusations of polygamy.
Okay, so here's my question to on that, because thank you for that description, because that helps me to figure this out a little bit. So what role, first of all, what do you think that critical thinking is? How would you define critical thinking? And what role does this spiritual confirmation process play in critical thinking as you understand it when it comes to things like history?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty obvious, like the three of us here, and probably anybody who's listening to this episode, we have the benefit of getting basic logic in our educational upbringing. There was when I took a community college class on critical thinking, it was the first time that there was a systematized way of looking at logical fallacies, as well as what could the purpose or the bias be. I loved it because I was a young guy, and it's like, okay, these are all things that make sense, and now I'm thinking of it. So your question, ask your question one more time about what role does critical thinking play?
What is critical thinking to you, and what role does spiritual confirmation play in a system of critical thinking for subjects like history?
I believe God expects us to examine the best to our abilities, the available evidences from all of the available sources. I believe that he expects us to use discernment and judgment when somebody's saying this car is the best one, to recognize, well, he's a salesman who's going to make more money on making that. God expects us to be as discerning and evaluative as possible. I do not believe that that people are right with God when they simply say, because my parents say so, or because the traditions that I've been raised with say so. At some point, they're going to have brought to their mind, hey, didn't you feel a prompting to dig deeper, and you didn't do anything about that prompting? So I do not believe that God is the God of because I said so. Certain circumstances, he might be intervening with something like that. But I believe if we're going to actually progress in this life and in the hereafter, it's only by choosing to do so. We are required to evaluate and examine.
I see.
I believe I'll just let me sum it up this way. I believe examining and discerning honestly is a godly pursuit.
Okay. Okay, I hear you. What I'm asking more specifically, for example, is most atheists pride ourselves on being critical thinkers and holding down the corner for critical thinking. And religious people, you can go stay on your corner with God, but I think we can understand each other, because it does seem to me like you seem to think that critical thinking does play a role in the facts that you validate about the universe. And you did seem to say to me a minute ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there are instances where something makes sense to you logically, but that you take it to God in prayer and get the spiritual witness that it is something else, and then seem to posit that your bias is the logical side, the logical conclusion, and that you need to check that bias with the information God gives you instead. So that's why I'm thinking is that, because in critical thinking, as we atheists tend to say, it's checking bias. You check your bias, you check somebody else's bias. And there's a series of, as you say, rudimentary ideas and policies or rules. My favorite is the baloney detection kit from Carl Sagan, but there are other standards out there. Checking for where is your bias in that. Now, any atheist is going to make the case to say, if you pray and ask God, is this true or not true? And he says, I know what you think the logic says, but I'm telling you the logic is wrong. Any atheist, snide, materialist, existentialist like myself is going to say, no, that's the bias. That right there that you're listening to is listening to the bias over the logic. It would makes more sense to trust what is logically provable than to trust I'm use a generous word, the intuitive results of spiritually confirming what you believe.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. I know that in 2015, the best that I can come up with logically is Joseph Smith is even if I'm not at the point of calling him a sexual predator, logically, it makes sense why that's his characterization, and it sounds like he earned it as best as I could discern it with the available evidence at the time. Wasn't until a few years later, examining that same evidence with just a different possibility to where a lot more was falling into place, and I recognized the spiritual confirmation saying, hey, these accusations being made against him, now you're seeing a bigger picture to where it was false. So yeah, I do believe that there's an eternal source of all truth. Sometimes I feel promptings to pursue this topic and not that topic. For example, Heidi, as much as I have enjoyed her presentations on the possible occult aspect of Joseph Smith's life, I haven't felt a spiritual prompting to pursue it. Maybe I will, even though it's fascinating. But yeah, I do view a higher power beyond any and all of us. And life for myself and for my family has been more stable, more loving, more enduring. And it helps me to view generations into the future because of that foundation of knowing that there's eternal truth beyond us.
So, okay, cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think this has been I think for one thing, we will never come to a full understanding of things from the past. And whether we do it with logic or whether we do it with prayer, I mean, we weren't there, and history is his story. And, obviously there are victors on any side. So I feel like there are a lot of things that go on with this. And I think that they've been weighed on both sides tonight, but I don't know that we're going to get any further this way. Yeah. I do think it's a fascinating topic, and I do very much value and love both of you guys. So I'm happy that we were able to come on. I love that we can go from no belief in God to lots of belief in God to his belief in God's different than my belief in God. And we're all still friends at the end of it. So I love that. And that's the point.
I challenge you both to a wrestling match.
Yes, I'm going to lose. I saw you wrestle. Nope.
Yeah, right. I don't do. Are you in Utah, Exmo Joe? I am, but I don't do any Krav Maga or any of that business.
I will take you for a fermented alcoholic beverage.
That sounds good.
Yay.
We should do that.
I shall go as well.
Podcast. Hey. Bunch of drinking FOMOs.
Yes, there we go. And with that, I think we've kind of beat a dead horse first things go, because we're all going to leave with our same opinions. Although I learned a lot, because really polygamy wasn't any of the things I've ever studied. I just, much like Jacob was like, yeah, that's what happened, because that's what they said for a lot of my life. And I really didn't know other than a few things about it. So I think this was fun both ways.
Let me just, my final thought is, this is one of those subjects to where I would say, learn the original sources rather than repeat the narratives, because I've been repeating the narrative the majority of my adult life, only to find out it is not consistent with the original sources. This is a subject that I'd say dig in, and if you feel inclined.
Awesome. And there are many, many places where you can go do that. They've given multiple places tonight where you can go do that. And I still think, we all have to keep an open mind. But at the end of the day, I'll say this: ultimately, what Jacob said is true for all of us. Exmo Joe isn't going to all of a sudden become a Christian again. Jacob's not going to go back and start brigamiting. And Heidi is not going to change her opinions either. But like I said, it doesn't matter. I think it was fascinating.
Exmo Joe and I are going to chug a beer, then go to church together.
I will chug the beer with you, Jacob, but I'm not going to church.
I will, but you buy the first beer. I will buy the second beer. If we get to 4 beers, we can start talking about church. Okay.
I want a different drink, but I'm happy to come with you boys as long as there's no fighting, no duking it out.
Beer or tequila.
Now, I don't know if Jacob wants me to go, though. He didn't invite me.
I'll invite you anyway. I've invited you to church a few times. You and the
I meant for the beer. I don't want to go to the
sorry.
Hey Jacob, before anybody goes anywhere, I just want to say thank you for being willing to do this. I've been talking about having this conversation with you. I hope you feel like it was respectful, and like I did listen to you and hear you out.
It was, and I view that I really do think I overstepped on how hard that I got with you earlier on. I kind of have a habit of doing that. I did that to Brad Whitbeck as well. He's a Mormon dude. So I'm asking you to be patient with me when I respond a little bit too aggressively early on. I can get over it, and I would very sincerely like hanging out with you.
Cool. Sounds good.
Very nice. Well, once again, everybody, remind everybody else out there where they can find you. Exmo?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jacob.
Disciple of Christ on YouTube. And look up this one: Disciple of Christ, Jacob IsBell versus Jacob Hansen. You'll see me choke him out.
Yes, it was good. I was there. I took the picture. It's a good one. Yay!
I had other plans that night, but we were talking about my going to that, and I was like, well, I don't know. I watch Jacob Hansen sometimes, and I honestly I wouldn't mind seeing that. Maybe I'll watch that tonight before I go to bed. Hey, I'll drink a couple beers and the tequila and then watch that. Oh, that sounds good. I'm Exmo Joe, also known as Joe Rollins, the author of the Korihor Argument and the host of Hellfire Agency. You go to hellfire.agency. There's no .com. The .agency is the .com. You can sign up for only $6.66 a month, and the Father of Lies thanks you for that. And but you can also find me on YouTube and on your favorite podcast streaming service. And we got new updates on Tim Ballard. The whole Tim Ballard thing is going off crazy, guys.
Lewinsky.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It's like blue dress scandal on Max.
Blue dress scandal.
Make sure that you go and subscribe.
Listen, men, these women don't wash their clothes. You can't trust anyone. So I am Heidi Luv. I'm from the Unfiltered Rise. I don't have stained dresses because I think they should be washed, and that's gross. So Unfiltered Rise, everywhere podcasts are served. And these guys are both my friends, and I'm so grateful you guys came on. I appreciate you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Thanks for doing this. Bye-bye.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Worship Satan. Wait, I mean, what?
He doesn't believe it, says his mom.
Buenas noches a todos.
There we go.
Hasta